I'm going to share my screen. Okay, welcome everyone to training number 2, or you could say 3 if you count Mega, which, you could do that. Today we have a lot that we're going to be covering. Let me get where I can actually see the chat. So I'm going to do this kind of quickly. I did not actually finish the presentation. I had to skip a bunch of stuff for this morning's presentation, so I'm going to try to go a little bit faster this afternoon. And maybe this might be the one that is actually recorded and posted to everyone. But I'm going to try to go quickly. We have a lot to cover today. We are going to be talking about staffing requirements, fiscal management, and eGAP requirements. If everyone would please stay muted as they come into the room. Normally I try to mute everybody. Carla, if you'll do that, if you have access, now that I'm sharing my screen, I can't see it.
Yes, I got it.
Mute everyone. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I will be looking at the chat, so if you have questions as I go, please feel free to put them into the chat. But I'm going to try to go through this fairly quickly so that we can try to get further than we got this morning. But I don't want to ignore anyone's questions if you have them. So please feel free to put it in the chat if you have any questions. All right. This is just the standard slide that has our staff on it, and nothing has changed from last time. I did put the link to the Google form that we use for you to sign in and sign out of today's meeting in the chat, but also here is a QR code if you prefer to do it on your phone. But go ahead and do that now so that we have documentation that you are here for the entire meeting. And then of course, we'll ask you to do it again at the end of the meeting. Again, that QR code, that link is in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and move on, but you should be able to access it there. So today, again, we're going to talk about leadership and staffing requirements. We're going to focus on differences between administrative requirements and non-administrative staff. We're going to talk about financial management reporting and sustainability, and we're going to go over your eGAP applications and what you can expect regarding that. So we're going to start with leadership and staff. That is our guiding principle number 7. And that principle basically says that your program has, or, the ideal 21st century program has a stable, strong leadership that, and qualified staff, each of whom supports and engages youth in positive ways. That your staff is highly involved in decision making and participate in ongoing professional development. Program directors and site coordinators are deeply involved in day-to-day operations of the program and provide staff with the support and time that they need to fulfill their job responsibilities and meet their professional development goals. All right. So general staffing requirements is what I'm going to go over first. Please know that all 21st century staff, if you're paid with 21st century funds or really any federal funds, you have to keep personnel activity reports, or PARs is what we call them for short. They should reflect any time that is worked for the 21st century program. It should detail what time the person starts their working hours, or their working time, what time they end it. And actually, it should also have a brief description of what was done during that time period for each day. We normally, we used to actually ask that you turn these in monthly. We have not been doing that lately, and we're for now going to continue to not necessarily ask you to turn them in on a monthly basis, but your TAs will ask to see these, and these are also something that we'll ask for during compliance monitoring. And if we're ever in a situation where we feel like something sketchy might be going on with your staffing or something like that, we may ask to see them at any time. So you should always have those prepared and ready to go and ready to be reviewed. Your hours worked for 21st century activities must be completely separate from any other paid duties and cannot exceed a total of 8 hours in a day. So please understand, this came up last week at Mega. Someone mentioned that their teachers are actually paid by the school system until 3:30, but their 21st century program begins at 3:10. And we just made sure that they understood, or we want to make sure that everyone understands that your PARs should actually start at 3:30, because you're still being paid to work with other funding up until 3:30. And you don't want to be accused of double dipping. So you can't pay somebody to work from two different funding sources during the same time period. So be careful about that and make sure that your PARs begin when your contracted hours during the day end, okay, and not before that time. You do have to upload a job description into eGAP for every 21st century position, whether it is an administrative position, a teaching position, bus driver, a nurse, if you want to hire one of those. Make sure that you have a job description for each of those, a full job description, not just a paragraph that kind of describes what the position is, but it should include the details that it specifies in the RFA. I don't have those on me right this second, so I don't want to misspeak, but they are laid out in the RFA of what is included in each job description. Okay, so throughout today's presentation, I am going to refer back to this presentation that we mentioned in our last virtual training that was done by Tiffany Kessler from the Bruman Group. They are the law firm that is the kind of experts on federal program funding. Pretty much any kind of education, federal funding, they're the experts on it. And so I'm going to refer back to her presentation several times. If you have not had the chance to watch her presentation, I highly recommend that you go do that, because she is way better and way funnier than me in talking about federal rules and regulations. And I learn something every time I listen to her speak. So I'm going to do my best to touch on things that apply specifically to 21st century from some of her slides, like I did last time. But if you want to hear from a true expert, I highly recommend that you use the link to go watch that video when you have a moment. I think it lasts for about an hour, and we will send you these slides, and the recording of this session once this is completed. It may be tomorrow before I get those sent out. All right, so referring to salaries and wages, please keep in mind that any employee paid in whole or in part must document their time and effort. So this is what we're referring to when we're talking about PARs. This is a federal requirement of all federal programs. So it's not just 21st century. If you're paid with Title I funds, you have to also document your PARs. We even have to do it here at the State Department, okay? So they have to be, if you're paid with federal funds, you have to have PARs, and they do not only have to include the time that you work, but they also have to accurately reflect the work that was performed. So make sure you do have that brief description each day of what you did that day. It doesn't have to go into great detail. It could be similar, a similar description each day if you do the same thing from day to day, but you do have to have that as part of your PARs. This is just more federal rules and regulations. To CFR 200.430 also talks about personnel documentation. Notice it says it's not to exceed 100%, so you can't pay for somebody to work more than full time with those 21st century funds or any kind of federal funds. All right, this is an example of a personal activity report. We should have this downloaded to the 21st century website that you can use, but you can also use a PAR form that your LEA has. You don't have to use this specific form. It just does need to include, information about the employee. It needs to include the date. They do have to keep PARs every day that they work, which lists their time in and time out, their total hours, and of course, a brief description of what their responsibilities were that day. And then it does have to be signed by both the employee and either the site coordinator or the program director, or both. It's up to you how you want to do that. It just we require that it's signed by one or the other when it comes to either the site coordinator or the program director. You just want someone in an administrative capacity to sign off that those PARs are correct. Okay, so make sure that you are checking those and then they are accurate. We also have this form. It's called the Request for Additional Work Hours form that you should be able to find on the website as well. If you can't find it, please let us know. There's some things that we may not have uploaded that need to be uploaded because, we're trying to build it again. But this is a request form. If you have an employee that needs to work outside of the typical allowable hours, and we're going to talk about what those allowable hours are depending on the position in just a moment when we get to that. But I do want to point out this form exists if there is a reason or a justification that your staff needs to work outside of the normal hours, then you can submit this form and ask for permission for them to do that. Okay, you just have to provide a justification of why they need to work those extra hours, and we will take that into consideration and either approve it or not approve it. Another thing that applies to all staff is fingerprinted background checks. Anyone who works with children in the state of Alabama in a public facility has to have a criminal fingerprinted background check. Okay. Here is the Alabama law that it states this. I'm not going to go into great detail, but just notice it says any certified or non-certified individual of public educational facilities, also non-public educational facilities, so private schools even, anybody who's working with children, youth, adolescents, or the elderly have to have undergo a criminal background check and be fingerprinted. That is specific to Alabama law. Okay, and here's the law that states that. So who has to be fingerprinted? All personnel that work with the program. If they're paid with 21st Century Funds and they could potentially at any point be in contact with students or children, they have to have a fingerprinted background check. Also, volunteers or high school graduates, like student assistants who work directly with students, have to have that fingerprinted background check. And then any vendors that you pay that come in and work with your students must have that fingerprinted background check. I don't think these slides state this, but we do expect anyone who's paid with 21st Century Funds to pay for their own fingerprinted background check, just like you guys had to do when you became a teacher. I'm assuming most of you are teachers or educators. Just like we had to do, when we became educators and we had to pay for our own background check as kind of part of our onboarding to become a teacher or an educator, we expect the same thing for your staff or your vendors that work with your students. Now, volunteers, if you have a volunteer that regularly comes in to your program and works with the students for free, you don't pay them, they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, then we are fine with you using 21st Century Funds to pay for their fingerprinted background check because it is a little pricey. I think it's around $65, somewhere in that range. And we wouldn't want to require someone who's coming in and not making any money to have to pay for this to be done. So you can use 21st Century Funds to pay for a volunteer to have that background check. But if we're paying them to come in and work with the students, then they need to pay for that themselves. So here's how that works, okay? First, we're going to talk about anyone who's paid with 21st Century Funds. Anybody who's paid with 21st Century Funds, whether it's a vendor or a teacher, whatever the case may be, if they're paid, they have to have a current and clear background check status in the teacher certification portal or the T-Cert portal, okay? If you hire someone to come work for your program and they tell you, yes, I have a cleared background check, you can go to this link, to the T-Cert link, which is provided here, but you can also search for it on the internet. And you can search for their certificate and look for their name. You just have to basically provide their first and last name. Do try to make sure that it is the right person because they sometimes they'll have multiple of the same name in there, and you just need to try to make sure that you are looking at the correct person and make sure that they have had that background check done. If you cannot find where the person has a cleared background status in T-Cert, then they are going to have to go through the teacher certification process to obtain clearance. before you let them work with students. And so here there's links to instructions of how to do that. If you're from an LEA, you should have people that work for your LEA who can give them instructions on where to go and what to do to have the background check done, because they have to do that all the time. If you're with a CBO, oftentimes you can still work with the LEA that you're working with and they can help you get that done. But just in case, there's instructions here from the education certification site that tells you where to go and what to do to have that done, and your steps for registering for criminal history, steps for getting that certification and that clearance done for you. Again, I will provide this presentation so you will have access to these links. Unpaid adult volunteers have to go through a different process. At least as far as I know. Someone at Mega last week did say that TCERT allowed some of their volunteers to go ahead and go through the TCERT system. And if they do, then that's great. But from what I was told from TCERT is they really, truly normally only do that for paid positions, not for volunteers. And so if that's the case in your system, if they won't let you go through TCERT, then you have to go another route to have that fingerprinted background check done. Now, this slide just basically goes over what all is included in that fingerprinted background check. The main thing, why I keep saying fingerprinted, that makes it so important is that Federal Bureau of Investigation, that is what the fingerprint, that's the checking their database is what that fingerprinted background check provides that a lot of other background checks do not provide. And so this is the big thing that we require here in the state of Alabama that may not be required in some other states, but we insist upon so that we can check that FBI database. Okay. So if you're an unpaid volunteer, then often you can either go through DHR to have your background check completed, or you can go through your local sheriff's department to have that background check completed. Okay. The problem, not problem, but the only issue with going at it this way is that when you go through teacher certification makes the determination as to whether that person is cleared to work with students or not. When you go through DHR or go through your local sheriff's department, they're going to give you the findings from the background check, but they're not going to give you a determination as to whether that person is safe or not to work with students. And so you actually, as the program director, it will be the program director's responsibility to look at the results of that background check and determine whether that person is eligible to work with children or not, depending on what may or may not show up on their background check. So, so there is some guidance that DHR provides that is linked here on this slide that gives you a list of what they consider disqualifying crimes. And in other words, if this crime is on this person's record, you shouldn't let them work with children. Okay. And so you can use those guidelines to help you determine whether you feel like that person is safe or not safe to work with children. Okay. Because, something may come up that occurred 10, 15 years ago on the background check, and it may be something that you think to yourself, well, this really doesn't have anything to do with children. So should I, does that mean they're not safe to be around kids? Well, this guidance that's linked on this slide can help you make that determination. Okay. Now, please note that if you have a volunteer or you have a presenter that's coming in to just do a one-time presentation that is going to be supervised by several other adults, they don't have to have that fingerprinted background check. So for example, if you have a dentist that's coming in to work with the students and teach them how, teach them about gum care or whatever, teach them how to brush their teeth and floss and all of the things, you don't have to make that dentist come in and do a background check or have a fingerprinted background check, because they're just going to come in and do that one-time presentation with their students, probably a large group of students with lots of other adults in the room, and they're not going to be alone, or they shouldn't be left alone with with any of those students at any time. And that's fine. Same thing, like if you have parents coming in for a parent and family engagement activity, you don't have to do a background check for them, because again, all those activities should be well supervised by other adults. And there shouldn't be a situation where a parent is left alone with a child other than their own child. Okay. So that's fine. You don't have to have the background checks for that. But if you've got a volunteer that comes in regularly and they have the potential of working one-on-one with students or working with just students in close quarters of some sorts, then they do need to have that fingerprinted background check completed. There is an exception to this, and this is really from a couple of years ago, so I'm not even really sure if any of our sites are still partnering with ALS PALS, but that is a program through the University of Alabama. 2 years ago, this whole issue came up with the background checks, and they reached out and said, hey, we partner with several of your 21st century sites. They provided student tutors that would come in and work with the students as part of like a voluntary, to get volunteer work in. And they did a background check with those students, but it wasn't the fingerprinted version. It was like a less expensive version that did not include the fingerprinting. And they asked for special permission to allow those students to continue to work with our students, the 21st century students. And so what we did was we ended up creating an MOA between the ALSDE and the University of Alabama, stating that they understood and that they would make sure that their students understood that they could never work with students alone. They may never be left alone with students. There would always have to be another adult in the room when they were working with kids or tutoring kids. And so we worked that out. And I know that they were talking about the next year making it a requirement for all of the students to have that fingerprinted background check, but I haven't reached back out to see if they are doing that now. But I know they were thinking about it because a lot of the students that did this were planning to become teachers, and so they were going to have it done at some point anyway. And so I believe that has happened because it hasn't come up since. But there can be some flexibility sometimes. You just need to reach out to us and we can try to work out some sort of agreement if something similar to this is occurring at your site. Okay. Moving on. Oh, what you have to have for required documentation to show that you've done your background checks, okay? You should maintain a list of all the individuals that work at your site, including your staff, any high school graduates, university or college students, volunteers, or vendors. So you should have a list, and you should have documentation that each of those individuals has a status of cleared in TCERT to that they've had that background check and that they are cleared to work with students, and it's showing up in TCERT. So I would suggest you take a screenshot or something like that of their clearance from the TCERT portal. Each site coordinator should have a copy of this for all of their site staff, and then each program director should have a copy for all of the site staff for each of the sites that they're over. Okay, same thing with a volunteer. They should also have a cleared status from DHR, or they should have a copy of the background check report and their justification of why they feel that the person has a clear background check from the program director. Again, the site coordinator should have a copy of this, and the program director should have a copy of this. Our TAs do come out and check these, and then we also do ask for this in your new compliance monitoring. So you should be able to pull this information at any time if you're asked for it. If you do have individuals that work with your program that don't have a current and cleared background check, then they should not be allowed to provide any services or work with any students until they do have a cleared background check on file. If we come out and check your background checks to see if they've been done and you do not have the proper documentation, then we may close your program down until we can get that documentation. We have done that in the past until we could get that done. And then if it becomes, an extended problem, then it may result in, your program being suspended, termination of your subgrant funding, and potentially other legal consequences, especially if something happens to a child on your watch and you've allowed people to work for your program who did not have that fingerprinted background check, then you would be legally liable for that. So please make sure you're getting this done. We don't want anybody to get in trouble, and we definitely don't want any of our children to be put into dangerous situations. I've already mentioned that our TAs will check these. All right, so let's talk next about specific administrative positions. First, let's talk just general information, okay? For administrative positions in eGAP, we code those under function code 6000 through 699. Now, if you're a site specialist, you may not, or site coordinator, you may not deal with eGAP, so please, take this with a grain of salt. But those of you who do work with your budgets in eGAP, you do need to be aware of this information. Please know that there is a 30% cap on administrative costs and indirect costs combined. So another way of putting that is that your admin cost plus your indirect cost added together cannot exceed 30% of your total grant amount. Okay, that's something that we do check for, but please make sure you're not going over that 30%. And every year we have people say, can that be extended? Can we have more for admin cap? But please know that I have looked at RFAs from many, many other states, and I've never seen any other state have an admin cap as high as ours. Most states have like a 10% admin cap, and some states just require that admin costs be paid for by the LEA or CBO as like an in-kind investment into the program. So we are very generous with this 30%. So we make you stick to it. So please know, we're already way above what a lot of other states allow. Okay. So your administrative costs include your admin salaries, benefits, any contracted services. Some admins can be contracted instead of having a salary. The professional development expenses such as travel and per diem for your admins is included in your admin costs. You cannot put PD for an admin under 2215, which is for instructional staff professional development. It cannot be coded there. It has to go under admin costs, 6000 through 6999. Okay. Also, the conference registration, if they're going to a conference, and then any other materials and supplies for the administration of the grant, such as the admin's laptop or office supplies or anything like that, those would all be coded under admin costs 6000 through 699. All right, let's specifically talk about expectations of the program director. Every subgrantee, whether you're an LEA or a CBO, should have one main program director, okay, that is over all of the sites of that subgrantee. It may just be they're over one site. It could be that they're over 10 sites, okay, but they should have one program director. This person serves as the primary contact for the ALSDE on all matters related to their 21st century program. So they're the first people we're going to reach out to if we have a problem or a question or something like that about your site. We're going to reach out to the program director. If we can't get in touch with the program director, we'll try the site coordinators next. That is supposed to be our main person we go to, okay? Their responsibilities, I always compare them to like the superintendent of a school system. They are over all the different sites and making sure those sites run the way they're supposed to according to their RFA. And so they should be providing regular monitoring of the sites. They should be visiting sites at least once a week, making sure things are running smoothly, making sure that sites are implementing their education programs, make sure that student safety, procedures are being implemented, that safety drills are being done. There's check-in and check-out procedures, things like that. They also should oversee the completion and timely submission of any required reports and data. So even if it's something that's required for the site coordinator to turn in, it's the program director's job to make sure it's being done on time. Also things like reporting attendance, your PARs, your GEPRA data reporting, all of that, it falls under the program director to make sure that those things are also being reported, within the required timeline as well. They should also make sure that the budget and fiscal matters are being managed appropriately. So they don't have to be the person who does the budget, but they do need to make sure it is being done by someone who is qualified to do that, and that they are turning in things like their expense reports on time, that they are completing contracts and MOUs appropriately according to the federal regulations, which we're going to go over later in the presentation. So it's their job to make sure things are being done the way they're supposed to be done. They must be available to attend all mandatory meetings, trainings, conferences required by the ALSDE. We encourage active collaboration between the 21st century, or they should be encouraging, active collaboration between the 21st century site and the schools that they're serving. So in a minute, we're going to talk about that there's supposed to be a collaboration liaison between the site and the school. The program director can serve in that capacity, or they can assign that job to someone else, but they just do need to make sure that that collaboration is taking place. And typically for a program director, the time they spend working on 21st century, I'm sorry, I was thinking this said something else, but the time that they, typically for a program director, their work hours may be during program hours and some may be outside of program hours. So some of the work that they're responsible for might be able to be done, before the afternoon program starts, or, later in the evening or something like that. But it is important that the time spent working on 21st century is paid separate than any time they spend doing another task that they're paid for with other funds. So a lot of times the program director is just a part-time position and they have another position in the school system, such as the federal program director or something like that. And so a portion of their salary is paid out of 21st century funds, and a portion of their salary may be paid out of another funding source. It's important that when they're supposed to be doing 21st century work, or when they're being paid to do 21st century work, that is what they're doing. Okay. And their hours cannot exceed 8 hours a day. Now, we do have a best practices funding calculation to determine how much you should pay your program director depending on the number of sites they served. We saw that this was a need a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, when we saw that we had some sites who had one program director that was being paid a full-time salary to just be over one site, and they still couldn't get things turned in and submitted on time. When you had other sites that had one program director that was over 10 sites, and they managed to very adequately keep track of all of their sites and make sure that everything was done in a timely manner and got their job done easily managing 10 sites. Okay. And so we started talking to different program directors that ran different size programs across the state and wanted to come up with a fair way to pay our program directors based on the number of sites they served. And so this is what we came up with. And this is what we require when we check your budgets. This is what we expect to see in your budget when you're paying your program director. So a program director is a part-time position unless they are directing 5 or more sites, okay? If the program director has 5 sites or more, then they can be full-time if you want them to be, if your budget permits for them to be. They still don't have to be, but if their budget permits, they can be paid a full-time salary to work 40 hours a week, okay? But if the program director has less than 5 sites, 1, 2, 3, or 4 sites, then their salary and the number of hours they work should be prorated based on the number of sites that they actually have. So for example, and basically what we say is per one site counts towards 20% of a full-time salary or full-time hours worked, okay? So in other words, if you had one site, we would expect you to work 20% of a 40-hour week, which would be 8 hours a week, okay? And be paid to work basically 8 hours a week if you just had one site. Another example, let's say you have 3 sites, okay? A program director with 3 sites should work approximately 24 hours because 20% times 3 would be 60%. 60% of a 40-hour week would be 24 hours. And so they can be paid to work 24 hours in the week to manage those 3 sites. Okay. Also keep in mind that whatever that total salary is should be divided equally among all their sites. And so let's say that this person that runs 3 sites, let's say their total came out to they make $20,000 a year to be the program director for the 21st Century Program. That $20,000 would need to be divided into 3, and each site pay a third of that person's salary. Okay. A program director can be paid hourly or they can be contracted. But if you're going to say that they're contracted, then you do have to upload the MOU, and that MOU should detail how you came up with the amount that you're paying them and what the expectations are for that program director. How many hours a week are they expected to work? And I'm just not going to lie to you, we're going to look at the amount you're paying them, the number of hours that you're expecting them to work a week, and we're going to see if it's a reasonable amount, okay? If it's not, then we may ask you to make some adjustments to that, all right? A typical salary for program directors in the state over, of the programs that we currently have, it tends to run anywhere between $40 and $55 an hour. We don't tell you what you have to pay your people. Now, we will tell you if we feel like it's over the top, like if it is too much, if it's not reasonable, but we don't tell you an exact amount to pay your program staff or your administrators. But we do feel like you should listen to the typical salary and try to do something comparable so that you're being fair to your staff, okay? I've already mentioned the salary must be divided equally and paid out from all the sites' budgets. And if you have more than 5 sites, if a program director is over more than 5 sites, then you do have the option now of hiring an assistant program director, okay? I would say to pay that assistant program director at a slightly lower rate because even though they're going to have the same basic responsibilities as the program director is still going to be the decision maker, the final decision maker. They will be the one who's in charge of all the programs in total. The assistant is just going to help alleviate some of the duties of that main program director because there are so many sites, okay? And you can do that how you want to. You can split it however you want to. So let's say in my mind, there's 2 options here. So let's say that we have 6 sites, that our subgrantee has 6 sites. I could pay my program director to be a full-time employee and be responsible for the administrative oversight of 5 of those sites, and then pay an assistant program director as a part-time employee, 8 hours a week to have to be over that one extra site. Or I could split the sites equally among the 2. I could say that the program director is going to be over 3 sites and the assistant program director is going to be over 3 sites. They're both going to work approximately 24 hours a week. The main program director might make a little bit more money because they're probably paid at a slightly higher rate, hourly rate. So really we'll just leave that up to you guys. You can decide how you want to do that. Okay. Just keep in mind that when we reach out to the site, we're going to be reaching out to that main program director, and they will still be that final decision maker from our point and our main point of contact. at the ALSE. Okay, next position. Oh, by the way, I did forget to mention this. Let me go back over here. Notice I say required position and title. Please call it a program director, and not a program coordinator or any other name, okay? We do require that you have a program director, and we do require that you call them that position program director so that we know who is over the program, okay? Same thing down here. Now that we're going to talk about site coordinator, that is a required position, and we would prefer for you to use that required title, site coordinator, not site director, because it gets confusing. When you say site director, we're not sure if you mean the program director or the site coordinator. Just use the two required titles, please, in your narratives to make it easier on everyone. All right. A site coordinator must be identified for each proposed center or site and cannot be shared between centers and sites. So even if you have one grant that actually has two sites, we kind of not frown upon that, but we discourage it because it does stretch your administrative funds quite thin. But if you do have that, if you had one grant, one site grant, but it actually has two separate sites, like maybe the elementary and the middle school, then you do need to have a site coordinator at each of those sites. And that person does not need to try to go back and forth between the two sites, even if they're like next door to each other. So they can't be shared between two sites. I compare the site coordinator to kind of like the principal of the school. They are over the daily operation and coordination and delivery of services at that site, okay, at that 21st Century Center. All right. The program director and the site coordinator cannot be the same person unless that subgrantee only has one site. We had subgrantees reach out to us in the past and say, do we have to have both a program director and a site coordinator? Can't we just have one or the other? And the answer is, after thinking it through, sure, if that's how you if that's the best use of your funds to combine the position into one, you're welcome to do that, but only if you have one site for your whole subgrantee, okay? Then you don't have to have both a program director and a site coordinator. You can just have a program director that also is responsible for site coordinator duties, okay? The position should be responsible for ensuring that all daily attendance is entered into Easy Reports. All 21st Century students have been marked in PowerSchool, reviewing GEPR data to make sure that it's accurate before submitting it to the feds, that sort of thing, okay? Also, of course, they're going to be responsible for things like behavior, handling any kind of behavior issues that come up. They're sort of like the principal of the 21st Century program. They're going to handle any kind of issues and problems that potentially might take place during the program hours. That site coordinator is a part-time hourly position because 21st Century programs are part-time. They're no school year 21st Century program is going to last 40 hours a week. It's not going to be a full-time position. Most of them last somewhere between 12 and 15 hours a week, or maybe 18 hours a week. So that's basically what the site coordinator's hours should be. Most of the site coordinator's work should take place during program hours. However, they can charge the grant up to an additional hour per day to work either before or after the program to do things like prepare for the next day, plan for the week, things like that, okay? But that's just 1 hour per day can be charged to the grant for those type of duties if necessary, okay? And then also the site coordinator can be paid up to an additional 20 hours for pre-program planning. So like at the beginning of the school year, before the program starts, they can charge the grant up to 20 hours to do things like prepare the space for the 21st Century programming, order supplies and materials, hire staff, and that sort of thing. And then after the program, up to 20 hours for the end of the program closeout if needed. So shutting things down, making sure that materials and supplies are properly stored and that sort of thing once the program is over at the end of the year. Typical hourly rate for a site coordinator is somewhere between $35 and $45. And please note, it is common sometimes for the site coordinator to actually make more than the program director, especially if the program director is only serving 1 or 2 sites, because the program director really should only be being paid for about 8 hours a week, when the site coordinator might be being paid for like 16 hours a week or 15 hours a week. And that's fine. The program director does not have to be on site at all times during the program hours. They're just supposed to check in now and then make sure things are being ran appropriately. So they're not the boots on the ground when the site coordinator is the boots on the ground. Okay. And they should be there the whole time that the program is running. All right. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. I'm just going to keep on moving otherwise. Okay. Oh, question. Can you have 2 people share the position? Are you referring to the site coordinator position? Yes, no? Program director and site coordinator. Okay. So no, for program director, no, you cannot have 2 people share the program director position. There should only be 1 program director. There could be an assistant program director if you have enough sites, if you have 6 sites or more, then you can have an assistant program director, but typically there should just be 1 program director. Site coordinator, typically, again, we would say no. However, we might be able to be flexible with that if you have a situation where you can't find a site coordinator that's willing to work every day and you are dividing the work between 2 people. They're not going to work at the same time. They're going to split the position. Like maybe one is going to work on Monday through Wednesday and the other is going to do Thursday and Friday. Then we might be able to work something like that out for the site coordinator. But program director, there just needs to be 1 of. Okay, just like there wouldn't be 2 superintendents of a school system, you wouldn't, there wouldn't be 2 program directors. But site coordinator, we might be able to work with you, but just get with your program specialist and make sure we kind of work out how that needs to look. Okay, you're welcome. All right. Okay. Other potential administrative positions that are optional that you can hire if you want to, but you don't have to. Fiscal manager, this sometimes could be also referenced as the bookkeeper or the CSFO. You can call them whatever you want to. They would be the person who's responsible for your bookkeeping, supply orders, other business related administrative type tasks. They also would be responsible for submitting your expenditure reports each month. And so if that's something that you have had, like if you've been a program director or a site coordinator in the past, and that's something that your site struggles with, you don't have enough time to do that, you might want to consider hiring someone whose specific job is to be the fiscal manager and get that done. Okay? Because it is a requirement. It can put you out of compliance if you're not getting those in. So we have much bigger grants now. You should be able to hire someone to help with that if you can't, if it can't be done, with your current admin staff. Also, some people decide to hire a data entry person. Again, is an optional position that you can hire if you want to, but this person would kind of be responsible for collection and maintenance of all PowerSchool data, making sure the GEPRA data has all been entered and is accurate. They would also be in charge of things like data share agreements or tracking of your GEPRA measures, making sure your attendance has been entered, your discipline has been documented, making sure you're getting the appropriate assessment data, things like that. Okay, so that's another optional admin position that you can hire for. You don't have to, it's just totally up to you. Okay, and then again, collaboration liaison is a required position, but it doesn't have to be a standalone position. It can be part of somebody else's job, or if you feel like it's justifiable to have a standalone collaboration liaison where that's their main job, you can do that if you want to, if your budget can handle that. Just make sure that that would be considered an administrative position if you have it as a standalone position. So make sure your CAP can handle it, and then make sure that they are working full time on providing that collaboration between the 21st Century Program and the school day teachers. This is something that the feds have really pushed. They want to happen because remember, the main goal of this program is to increase academic achievement during the school day. And so if you don't know what the kids are learning during the school day, how can you do that? How can you provide them with activities in the after school program that's going to actually affect their school day learning if you don't know what they're learning during the school day? So there has to be that communication, and it should be happening either daily or weekly at least, okay? Weekly at the least. So I think I saw a couple people actually put monthly for their liaison, that they would communicate monthly. Your site specialist is going to ask you to fix that in your eGAP application, because maybe whoever your grant reviewer was missed that, but they should have counted points off for that, because really the communication is supposed to occur either daily or weekly at least. And we are going to be checking this with compliance monitoring. So someone asked in this morning's meeting, what kind of things are you going to check for? Well, we expect you to either be having some sort of log that you're keeping of when you're communicating. You need to have some sort of process in place of how that communication is taking place, whether it's through emails, whether you have an app, maybe the Remind app or something that you're using to communicate. Does the teacher fill something out and send it with the student each day, and then you send it back? I mean, how is that communication going to take place? And we're going to ask you for evidence of that. We want to see some examples of the communication that's occurring between the 21st Century Program and the school day teachers that's being facilitated by that collaboration liaison. So please make sure that's happening, because we will be checking for it and try to do a better job of that this year. All right, next is non-admin positions. Just some general information. Your non-admin positions are coded in your eGAP budget under function code 9130 or 9130 summer. 9130 and 9130 summer are both for extended learning. It's just if the expense happened during the summer, you put it under 9130 summer. That's the only difference. Okay. Most of your non-administrative staff hours should occur during program hours. Now, we will, for this position, also allow up to 1 additional hour per day for planning and prep work if needed, but please know that it's going to be kind of a red flag if you're saying that all of your teachers are working an extra hour every day, just because we know that's probably not really going to happen, right? I mean, a lot of these teachers have been working all day long. They want to get home when the program's over. So maybe once or twice a week they may stay late, but every day is kind of a stretch. That may lead us to ask you for some PARs, okay? Please know that there is that all the professional development is supposed to be provided to your staff, 10 hours of PD a week. And there is a 10% cap. I think I've already mentioned that, but there's a 10% cap on all professional development costs. So just keep that in mind. And that does include your admin PD as well, okay? So your non-administrative staff professional development will be coded under function code 2215, which is for instructional staff development, I think is what it's called. So you would take the amount that's been budgeted under 2215, add it to whatever PD was budgeted under 6,000 through 699 for your admin staff, and that total amount should not exceed 10% of the total grant. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about specific positions. None of these are mandatory. These are all things that you can have. You can have things outside of this. These are just some suggestions, okay? You could have a lead teacher. Typically, a lead teacher does provide instruction to students, but they also may have some administrative duties in the absence of a site coordinator, okay? So when you asked earlier, Deanna, you asked earlier if you could split the site coordinator position, you might want to do something like this instead. You may want to have a lead teacher who 3 days a week, they are most of the time that they are serving as in a teaching capacity, but when that site coordinator is not able to be there, they step in and do those administrative duties as a site coordinator. That's a possibility of something you could do. Okay. It is recommended that the lead teacher be a certified teacher, and meet regularly with the school day teachers on behalf of program alignment. So it may be the best person to be your collaboration liaison, could be your lead teacher. Your lead teacher should do things like, you should be paying them more, so they should do extra things like analyzing program data, help the other teachers plan lesson plans or lesson units, ensure that all the activities are aligned to the Alabama standards or the SMART goals or objectives. So they should just kind of help coach or mentor the other teachers, okay? You can also have academic teachers. Now, we do have kind of rules about your academic teachers. Academic teachers are considered teachers who are going to be teaching core subject academic activities, okay? They should be using evidence-based research, or making evidence-based research decisions about their programming. They should use things like project-based learning, enrichment lesson plans. They should be tracking students' growth, using GEPRA data, things like that, okay? During periods of academic instruction, so if you have an activity going on that is academic based, then the student to teacher ratio should be somewhere around 12-1 or less, okay? Now, we don't want you to go way less. We don't want you to have like a teacher ratio of 5-1 or something like that, because then you're paying way too many staff to be there, and you're wasting 21st century funding that could be used for other things. But you should keep at least for academic activities, try to keep your teacher to student ratio to 12-1. The opposite, 1-12, for academic activities, okay? We do encourage you to get certified instructors to teach those core subject areas, so that we know for sure that they know the Alabama state academic standards, and that they know the content, and they are able to actually teach that subject. Now, we know that sometimes that's easier said than done. Let me go over that. Okay, I think I skipped something. Okay, so we know sometimes that's easier said than done. Sometimes it's really hard to get your certified teachers to stay for an after-school program or to come and teach during a summer program, and you may have no other choice than to hire non-certified staff or teachers, okay? If that's the case, we do have requirements of those non-certified teachers if they're going to be teaching one of the core subject areas. They have to be knowledgeable of the Alabama academic standards and have necessary subject matter credentials. And so these are examples of what we consider acceptable non-certified staff, okay? They might be a retired or former educator. They could be a third or fourth year college student who is either majoring in education or majoring in one of those core subject areas that they're going to be teaching, like English, reading, math, or another appropriate subject. Or they could be an individual who's earned a bachelor's degree or higher in one of those core subject areas, okay? It's just really important that you make sure that they have the knowledge to be teaching the subject, okay? I always give this example because to me it really is important. When I first took this job, the very first thing I did was read the state evaluators report for 21st century for the state of Alabama, and it actually said that students who participated in 21st century, they scored lower in science than those who didn't. And that was a huge red flag for me. And I have a science background. I used to work for AMSI before coming to federal programs. And so I know, because of experience, that when you have someone who doesn't have science content knowledge teaching science concepts that they don't understand, they can often create misconceptions in students. They could actually cause them to score badly, or not understand the material and answer questions wrong and things like that. So in my mind, that's probably what happened, is that, there was a big push at the time for programs to offer STEM activities and things like that. They may have had some non-certified staff providing the STEM activities, and potentially they were creating misconceptions that was actually causing more damage than it was good, okay? So that's why it's really important that if you're going to have core activities, which you're required to do, that you do have people with that knowledge to actually teach it so that they don't actually create more harm than good in the students. Okay. I'll get off my soapbox now. All right. So typical pay for an academic teacher is somewhere between $30 and $40 an hour in the state. If you're paying your people less, please consider paying them a little bit more if your budget will allow it. Because these are certified instructors and they've been teaching all day long, and then they're coming and staying after school, using time that they could be spending with their families. And I feel like, if you're struggling to find good people to work your after school program, it may just be that you're not paying them enough. Now, I'm not saying pay them $80 an hour, go way above this typical norm. But if you're paying them way below this, or if you're paying them, just $20 or $25 an hour, then, you know, they're less likely to want to do it in the first place, and definitely less likely to go for, create lesson plans and things like that above what they already have to do during the school day. So we encourage you to pay them somewhere in that typical range. All right, you can also have teacher assistants. I'm going to try to speed up. They assist with primary delivery of instruction, but should not be the only person delivering instruction, especially in a core subject area. They should just be an assistant. Okay, there should be an actual certified teacher providing the instruction. These could be retired teachers, paraprofessionals, auxiliary teachers. It could be basically anyone who either is no longer certified or has not become certified, but they have experience being like a teacher assistant or paraprofessional capacity. Typically, they get paid somewhere around $15 to $25 an hour across the state. You can also have student assistants. This could be a high school student that hasn't graduated yet, or it could be even a college student. And their job would be to assist the teachers and staff with tasks outside of those regarding delivery of instruction. So they're not teaching, they're not even assisting in teaching, but they are assisting in other things like walking kids from one activity to another, or passing out art supplies, or passing out snacks, that sort of thing. Keeping an eye on kids in the playground, if they're outside having physical activity time, things like that, but not really being a part of like any kind of core instruction. Okay. Typically, and then they cannot be alone with students. So they wouldn't be somebody that you would like send a child to the bathroom with. Okay. You would not do that for sure. If you hire student assistants or college students to be a student assistant, high school or college, you cannot let them be alone with the students at any point in the day. So there always needs to be an adult in the room, and you wouldn't send them to do things like help a child go to the restroom. You typically would pay them around $10 an hour. That's usually what they make across the state. All right, volunteers. Again, this is someone who is providing free services to your students, such as tutoring, art, dance, life skills, mentoring. We have a lot of programs that have like local churches that provide mentoring. Just keep in mind that your volunteers should be 21 years of age or older, and they do have to have that current fingerprinted background check on file that you are allowed to pay for them if they need to get that. Okay, question. Could a paraprofessional be alone with students for restroom breaks moving from area to area? Yes, that should be fine. I believe that is okay, because they are an adult, 21 or over. They've had that fingerprinted background check, and so that should be okay. You just wouldn't want like a student assistant, especially one that's still in high school that hasn't had any kind of background check done, to be doing things like taking students to the restroom. But a parapro, especially one that does that job during the day in the school system, should be fine. Okay. All right. Professional development. Again, it can't exceed 10% of the grant. All program staff must complete 10 hours of PD annually. The program director and site coordinators are required to attend at least that one dedicated 21st Century Day at Mega. Of course, they can attend the whole week if their funding permits. But they do have to each year of the grant attend. Usually it's a Thursday of Mega. And then there's ACEA. We talked about this at Mega last week, but one thing I forgot to mention that was in your Cohort 27 RFA is that it is required for the program director and at least 2 of your non-administrative staff to attend the ACEA conference. So that is a requirement. But we also encourage you to allow all of your non-administrative staff to attend the conference if your funding permits. Because they really are focusing on best practices for after school or out of school time programming. And it's really the boots on the ground. It's the people that work with the kids that really need to hear these messages. And so we want them to come to the conference if possible. You are allowed to close your program for those few days of the conference if you do want to come. Or if you do want your staff to come and you don't have enough staff staying behind to run your program, then you can close your program down. You just need to make sure you let the parents know as soon as possible. I would say go ahead and try to make the decision now so that as soon as your program starts, you can let them know, hey, on November 2nd through 4th, our program will be closed because we have to go to professional development training, a conference, and just make sure that you've reminded them over and over and over again so they don't forget and they find alternative place for their students to be after school. Brooke, yes, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question about ACA.
Okay, so the lady that is over, I think she's over ACA, long dark hair, her name is escaping me right now.
Lindsay?
Yes, was in our meeting at Mega last week. And she mentioned that, and I don't know how many total schools, so I don't really know if this will be an issue, but she mentioned that because of where they're having at the lodge, that there will actually be limited to the number of people. So is there any way that we can ensure that
at least those 2 get in?
Yeah, what if we can't get our required number of people registered?
Yeah, let me talk with them about that. I think Lindsay might be in here. I saw her sign in, but she was in this morning's meeting, so I'm not sure if she stayed. But yeah, we can definitely have that conversation. Of course, if they run out of space and you can't get in, then we'll try to work something out, an alternative to that required. But I don't know if they're able to hold space for that or not for the program director and the 2 required staff. Now that it's not just us that's required people to come, but also Jeff Norris from Office of Extended Learning, they're also encouraging people to come, and so that's why it's an issue that just wasn't thought about at the time. So
yeah, I know the ASAP grant people.
Yeah,
as
ASAP
well.
grant's paying for people to come too. Yeah, so a lot of people who have 21st Century also have an ASAP grant. So it may not be a huge issue, but we'll be as flexible as we can, and kind of handle that issue when it happens.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll definitely have that conversation for sure. Yep. But thank you for mentioning that. Okay. There was a question, do site directors not attend ACLA? I'm not sure what that is. Did you mean ACEA? They're not required to attend. But you can if you've got the funding to do it and you want to, you can, but they're just not a requirement. We did want the program director to be there just to make sure that somebody in an administrative capacity was there and heard about any new programming or got the message of any new messages that needed to come out about best practices. But we really wanted to make sure that some program staff that actually work directly with students got to come, and that's why we made 2 non-admin staffs be a requirement. Doesn't mean the site coordinator can't come. It just means that they're not required to come. So, okay. And then really quick, let's talk about out-of-state conferences. You can, up to 2 people per site can go to an out-of-state conference. But that conference has to be focused on out-of-school time programming. So it can't just be any education conference. It has to be an education conference that is for out-of-school time programming. So something like the Boost Conference or, oh gosh, Lindsay put a bunch of them in the chat earlier today, and I didn't write them down, and I always draw a blank. The Alabama, I mean, not Alabama, the education, I always forget. Beyond School Hours, that's one. Thank you. Anybody else can think of one? I need help. Thank you. After School Alliance, that's what I was trying to think of. Boost Conference, yes. Do keep in mind, though, just to let you know, there is talk. They are making some changes to the Uniform Grant Guidance, the UGG, that says something about if it passes, then all conferences for any that's if you're wanting to spend federal funds to go to a conference, that conference has to be approved by the federal government. And so that will apply to Mega, it'll apply to any conference that we might want to go to. And so we're not really sure what that's going to look like. We don't even know for sure it's going to be passed right now. They're taking comments from the public about that, but that is something that's potentially coming down the line that may affect us getting to go to conferences. So just know that's not something you have to worry about this year, but it may be an issue next year. But we'll handle that when we get to it. All right. All right, we're gonna stop there. Let's take a quick break. Quick personal break. I'm gonna cut it to just 5 minutes because we have so much left to still talk about. So it's 2:14 now. We'll say 6 minutes. So be back by 2:20. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pause the video, and then we'll get back started at 2:20. So take you a quick break, get you something to drink, and we'll see you guys back in 6 minutes.
What'd you want?
You're pretty familiar.
Share my screen again. All right, so now we're going to pick up with guiding principle number 12, which is financial management reporting and sustainability. So we want our programs to have sound fiscal and administrative policies and procedures in place to ensure that your funds are spent appropriately. The program has been developed and implemented. The program should have developed and implemented a long-term sustainability plan that includes the regular reexamination of program needs and goals, monitoring of fiscal stability, anticipation of program needs, and anticipation of upcoming challenges, and identification of new funding sources. Program continually forms new relationships with the community while nurturing partnerships. Okay, so before I go forward, I see a question. Okay, so there's a question. I have a quick question that relates back to PD. It's my understanding that staff can be paid for their 10 hours of PD. However, last week we were told that site coordinators could not be paid for attending conferences. Mega? This applies to staff that attend ACA as well. Okay, so I don't know why you wouldn't be paid for attending conferences. So as far as being paid to attend a conference, that you go based off of like your LEA rules and regulations. So typically it would just depend on it may depend on your LEA's rules. It may be that since that you're out of contract time, they've said they're going to pay you a per diem and travel instead. But if you attended because it's a requirement of Mega, I would think that they would still pay you a salary rate for that time that you were at the conference. So I'm not sure who told you that you could not be paid for attending conferences. ACA, yes, you can pay staff to attend, but again, you can't double dip. So let's say that staff is typically paid for that time to be a school teacher, and they're going to come to ACA. You can use 21st Century funds to pay for the substitute, to pay for that teacher. But your LEA, that's going to be up to your LEA. I would say that your LEA would not make you take leave for that. You would get paid your normal, your normal hours, your normal contract hours during that time. But if not, if they did make you take leave, then I guess you could be paid for 21st century funds. You just wouldn't be able to double dip. So you would need to make sure that was very clear. But again, you would need to talk with your LEA about their rules and regulations about that sort of thing. So yeah, you can pay for staff to do PD if it's outside of their normal hours, but you know, if it's fit within their programming out, like their normal paid hours or something like that, then you wouldn't pay them extra. Okay, I'm glad I answered that. Okay, all right. So again, let's talk about, we're going to first start talking about financial management, and I am going to flip back and forth between some of my slides and some of Tiffany's slides from Bruman, because I just want you to see that a lot of the stuff that we have as rules and regulations is not just things that we came up with. It's because it is a federal law or rule or regulation that applies to all federal programs or federal funded programs. Okay. Do keep in mind that you as the primary applicant has to serve as the fiscal agent. So if you, for example, if you submitted your application with a co-applicant, the main applicant has to be the fiscal agent. You can't pay the co-applicant to run that they can't be over the fiscal part of the grant. Okay. You also, and I'm going to mention this later, but you also can't subgrant out your grant. So you can't pay someone else to run your program for you. You have to be the person who is over the program and over the fiscal part. I mean, your organization, whoever the main organization is that applied for the grant, whether you're an LEA or a CBO, you are the ones who have to be the fiscal agent, and you have to make sure that the grant is, you have to manage the management. You have to do the management of the grant. How many times can I say management in a row? All right. All expenditures have to comply with applicable state and federal laws and regulations, including the UGG, so the 2 CFR 200s. This one is pointing out particularly 403 and other rules regarding allowability of funds. Costs must reflect necessary resources and be directly allocable to the project plan. They have to be reasonable in cost for the performance of the project, given the local market and the number of students being served. Have to conform to any limitations or exclusions as outlined in the RFA. Be administratively efficient. Be treated consistently by the subgrantee as an item of cost. Okay, so let's talk about what that means. Let me talk about what a couple of these mean. Okay. First of all, being reasonable. Given the local market. Okay, usually this tends to apply to if you want to hire someone and pay them as a purchase service to come in and provide some sort of activity with your students. You need to make sure that you're paying them what is reasonable according to the local market. So if you're not sure what that is, you can easily Google it. That's what we do at the state when we see that you're paying someone and it seems like it's a little bit much, like it's a little bit more than should be. We Google it and we figure it out. We see what the local market tends to pay someone who's providing that service, okay? And we expect whatever you're paying them to fall within that reasonable market. So if you're going to pay someone $500 an hour to perform a service, but it says on Google that typically that position only makes like $100 an hour, then we're going to tell you that you need to go back to the drawing board and explain to them that's too much, and that that the reasonable amount according to the market is $100. And if they take it, they take it. If they don't, you find someone else who will do it for that price if you can. But we do look at stuff like that. As far as being treated consistently by the subgrantee as an item of cost, this just is referring to mainly they're talking about things being considered a direct cost or an indirect cost. So if something is considered an indirect cost in one federal program, it has to be an indirect cost in another federal program. So for example, if child nutrition, it's a child nutrition program, which is federally funded, says that electricity or utilities are an indirect cost, then all other federal programs also have to treat utilities or electricity as an indirect cost. You can't have one program saying, yes, we'll pay it as a direct cost, and another one say, oh, we're going to pay it as an indirect cost. It has to be consistent across the board. So that's what that particular bullet is referring to. Has to be categorized according to GAAP procedures. That's the generally accepted accounting principles that all accountants are supposed to know. And it can't be included as an item of cost in any other federally funded program. So when you're purchasing something with 21st century funds, it is just for 21st century use. It's not to be used for Title I or Title II or any of the other federally funded programs. That is one thing that stands apart with 21st century. What you purchase for 21st century is just for 21st century use. So like, for example, if you use 21st century funds to put a computer lab into that center or school, then it could only be used after school with the 21st century kids. It could not, that computer lab could not be used during the regular school day with other students. Okay, I know that kind of may seem wasteful or whatever, but that's just what the federal rules state. So keep that in mind. A lot of people have confusion about that. All right, let's see what Tiffany says about allowability. Again, go listen to her. She's way better at this than me, but some of this is going to be repeats of what I just read to you on my slides, okay? To be allowable, cost must be necessary, reasonable, and allocable. Has to comply with cost principles of the federal award, consistent with policies and procedures. These are all the same things that we just talked about in that slide earlier. Let me see if there's anything here that stands out. Has to be adequately documented. And then this is something extra. Administrative closeout costs may be incurred until the due date of the final report. You don't have to really worry about that until the last year of your grant. So we will tackle that in 4 years. Okay. All right. So let's talk about what they mean by necessary and reasonable. So the definition of necessary is that the cost is generally recognized as ordinary and necessary for the recipient or subrecipient, or in our case, your subgrantee's operation or the proper and efficient performance of the federal award. In other words, you need this item in order for you to carry out the activities that you said you're going to carry out in your RFA. That's what we are going to consider necessary. Okay, so here's some questions you can ask yourself to determine if the expense is necessary. Is that cost included in your plan or in your grant application? Is it aligned with the goals of the program or the grant? Does your agency have the capacity to use what you're purchasing? In other words, I used this earlier. If you say you want to provide the students with hockey lessons and you go out and buy a bunch of hockey equipment, but there's no ice skating rink or even a roller skating rink anywhere near your 21st century program, then you don't really have the capacity to teach hockey unless there's something I don't know about. Okay. Or you want to buy some kind of supercomputer and your building doesn't have the electronic capacity to run that supercomputer, then that would not be a necessary or a reasonable thing for you to purchase. And then finally, is the staff knowledgeable regarding that program? So if you're going to purchase a curriculum or something, does your staff know how to use it? Do they know how to teach it? Do they know how to use that equipment? Okay, so if not, then it's not a necessary or reasonable cost. All right, let's talk about the definition of reasonable. A cost is reasonable if it does not exceed an amount that a prudent person would incur when the decision was made to incur the cost. Okay, again, you have to look at market prices for comparable costs in that geographic area. You can't look at if you're wanting to hire a school counselor, you have to look at what school counselors make in the state of Alabama, not in New York City, okay? Because they probably make a lot more than there, I would think, okay? They have a much higher cost of living than we do. So it has to be comparable with what that position makes in our geographic area. And then I just say, ask yourself this: would you pay that vendor that much if it was your personal money? And if the answer is no, then you might want to reconsider. You might want to do a little bit more research into what you really should actually be paying that person. All right. Allocable is the third thing, and really this just means that the cost is applicable to the program that you're running, okay? That you could allocate that cost to that program. It is something that makes sense for the program that you're purchasing the item for. That's just like my layman's terms of explaining allocable. All right, let's talk about certain items of cost and whether they're allowable or not. Of course, alcohol is not allowable. So for CBOs, if you have in your written procedures that when someone travels for professional development, that you will reimburse them the cost of their meals, the exact cost of their meals, and they go out to dinner and they have wine with their steak, then you need to make sure that they understand not to have that wine on their receipt. It needs to be billed to them separately and paid separately. If it's on the receipt, even if you didn't reimburse them for that cost, if alcohol is on that receipt, then that could be a finding from the feds. So you need to make sure that alcohol is not on any kind of documentation that you have, that you reimburse your staff for. Usually that, and I say that to CBOs because most LEAs, I think, go use per diem and travel costs and don't necessarily pay exact reimbursement amounts with receipts. I may be wrong, but I think most do not do that. Entertainment and prizes. This is 2 CFR 200.438. It says that costs of entertainment, including amusement, diversion, and social activities, and any associated costs such as gifts, are unallowable unless they have a specific and direct programmatic purpose and are included in a federal award. This does include field trips. If you watch Tiffany's video, she specifically mentions that states getting findings for allowing field trips to be taken to a venue that is typically meant for entertainment purposes. Even if they had an amazing lesson plan to go with it, the feds are still writing them up for that and giving them a finding for that. So we cannot do that. We can only allow field trips to places that are primarily for educational purposes, okay? Prizes and cost of prizes are allowable, again, if they have a specific and direct programmatic purpose and are included in the federal award. Here's the thing about a prize, okay? This is fairly new. We used to not be able to buy anything like prizes for students with federal funds. They are now saying you can purchase small, reasonable prizes for students as long as it has a direct programming purpose and it's not monetary. So you can't give kids money, you can't give them a gift card, but you can buy little trinkets, little award badges, or ribbons. Another example that I love to give is, let's say you set reading goals for your students, and that each child who meets that goal, you buy them a book that they get to take home and keep. Okay, and they don't have to bring it back. Or maybe they read 10 books and the 11th book they get to take home, or whatever the case may be. That is reasonable, okay? Not a crazy, and of course, it needs to be, a paperback, one of the more less expensive books, but things like that are okay. You can have awards and things like that, little trinkets, little prizes for them doing a good job. Just make sure it's very reasonable and it's just small trinkets, and definitely no gift cards of any kind, nothing that has like monetary value, okay? Another thing that always comes up when I mention the book thing is like a book vending machine. That would not necessarily be reasonable and necessary because you can actually give the student the book, a free book, without doing it through a book vending machine. They're cool and I get it, but it's probably something we're going to deny because it would not necessarily be a reasonable and necessary purchase. All right, advertising and public relations. I'm going to try to speed up. You can pay for advertising if it's for one of these purposes: recruitment of personnel, procurement of goods or services, disposal of materials, program outreach, that's typically what you would use it for, or public relations in limited circumstances. So you can do things like pay for flyers to be printed to send home to parents, encouraging them to enroll their child in your after-school program. You can do that. but you can't do like personalized swag items and things like that that would be considered like public relations type items. So for example, you could purchase homework planners for your students, but you couldn't pay to have like your logo put on that planner with 21st century funds. Okay. They could be generic, but you can't pay extra to have it, say your 21st century name. Okay. The only exception to this that we do allow is for t-shirts for field trips. You can, and I did check with Bremen to make sure this was allowed. You are allowed to purchase one field trip t-shirt per year for each of your program students that they can take home and keep. They just need to understand that it needs to be kept safe, and they will use that same t-shirt every time they go on a field trip that year. Okay. Can't buy a separate t-shirt for each trip. It needs to be one t-shirt that they do get to keep. We used to make you guys keep them on site, like have the student put it on over their regular shirt and then keep them and then wash them yourselves. We're not making you do that anymore. You can send them home with the kids so they can wash them in their own home with their own detergent and all that. They just need to understand, the parents need to understand that that t-shirt will be used every time they go on a field trip. And if they lose it, they can't get another one. Now, I would suggest that you purchase some extra t-shirts for field trips so that if you do have a student who loses their field trip t-shirt, you can let them borrow one and get it back at the end of the field trip. That could be a case where they put it on over their regular shirt, but I wouldn't give the t-shirt to the child again. You can also buy some for program staff to wear during the field trip as well, and maybe some extra ones for parents if you're going to have parent chaperones. Again, though, not give it to them, unless you know for sure they're going to be at every trip. You know, it's just something that they wear. And when I say t-shirts, I mean like a bright colored shirt that if a child gets separated from the group, they can easily find the group. And then you can pay to have your logo. You can pay to have it personalized, but the 21st century, the Alabama State 21st century, that round logo that you'll see on some of these slides, that has to be the main graphic on the t-shirt. You can have like your own logo or your school's logo or whatever on the t-shirt also, but it has to be smaller than the 21st century logo. Okay. And it has to be like no extra cost to add that site logo. Okay. Give me just 1 second because my boss is texting me and I just want to make sure that something is not wrong. Okay. All right. We're good. Okay. Okay, moving on. Again, professional development. This particular one is really referring to if you are actually giving professional development. It does mention food. You are not allowed to purchase food for professional development for your staff. So any meetings or PD that you provide to your staff, if you want to provide food, you're going to have to pay for it out of pocket or get maybe a community partner to pay for it, but you can't use 21st century funds for that. Okay. I mentioned at Mega last week that we are in the process of trying to figure out a plan for allowing you to provide some food for like parent and family engagement activities. We have not had a chance to sit down and do that yet, but we will try to do that this week. We'll do our best. Of course, I have to run it through Dr. Killingsworth, who's my boss, and make sure she's good with it. But we are going to try to make that an allowable activity. We just kind of need to figure out a way to make it equitable across the board. And have some sort of limit on it. So a percentage of your grant award or something like that. So we will get that information to you as soon, it's a top priority. And as soon as we come up with a decision, we will let you guys know and get that information to you. All right, travel costs. You should have written policies for your LEA or for your CBO about how you pay for travel, whether that's for professional development or if it's traveling between sites or something like that. So make sure you go by your organization's written policies. if you are charging the grant for travel outside of like PD, then there needs to be a justification for it. Like if you want to charge the grant for the program director to travel from site to site, there needs to be a really good justification for that. Because typically a program director would not like travel from one site to another in the same day. Usually it's like one day they go visit one site, one day they go visit another. Can't pay someone to travel from their home to, that would be like paying, I mean, that would be awesome if we got paid every day to travel to work, but that wouldn't be, you couldn't do that for your program directors. That includes like if your program director works during the day at your local CBO, like the Boys and Girls Club, and then you want to charge the grant for them to travel to go visit the sites from the CBO, I don't know that we'll allow that. So just make sure you provide a justification and we'll handle that on, we'll think about it and try to come up with a solution that everybody can be happy with on things like that. Okay. Next. Okay, this is just reiterating that it's your job as the subgrantee to maintain oversight and administration of the grant. You cannot charge families any fees for anything if you have a 21st century program. So you can't charge them for after school programming. You can't charge them for snacks. You can't charge them to go to on a field trip. You can't even charge them to pay for the food if you're traveling during meal times for a field trip. So you have to come up with other ways to pay for those things. Okay. If you just or you're newly got the grant and previously before this you charged parents for your after school programming, you can no longer do that. Okay. With 21st century, you cannot charge parents any fees. Okay, typically subgrantees are not allowed to use 21st century funds for any food purchases, including snacks, unless the purchases are to be used as part of an approved cooking class, cooking demonstration, or health and nutrition education lesson. And when I say demonstration or lesson, I mean something that is part of a regularly scheduled program that you offer and is part of activity that you offer as part of your program. Okay. There are some exceptions that I'm going to go over in just a moment, but you can't just, if you're going to have a cooking class, it needs to be a dedicated cooking class that you spend, 30 minutes a week teaching kids how to cook. Okay. And it needs to be really cooking, not making s'mores, not decorating cookies. It needs to be they're chopping stuff. They're mixing ingredients together to form something edible. Okay. There are all kinds of portable kitchen things that you can purchase that are meant for these type of programs that we encourage. And if you want to buy food for that, that is fine. It's just when you want to try to provide food for like a one-time thing, like Christmas time, decorating cookies is something I mentioned last week at Mega. That is not an allowable expense, okay? Because it's just a one-time thing. You can't purchase food for that sort of thing. All right. What you can do though is reach out to your local child nutrition program or your LEA's child nutrition program to provide food and snacks for your students, especially during the school year. All LEAs have a CMP program. I'm not going to read all these, but they have all of these different funding sources that can be used to provide meals and snacks to the students. Typically during the school year, a CMP program can provide 2 meals and a snack for free to the students. And so typically the 2 meals are breakfast and lunch, and then they can provide a free snack for your after school program. Even if you're a CBO, you may have to be responsible for going to pick that snack up if you're not in that school, but they should be able to offer that to you for free. Okay. Reach out to your child nutrition program for that. All right. Now, the summer is another situation. So there are some situations, especially during summer programming, where you might be able to purchase food and it is allowable. And we're going to talk about those conditions now. All right. So first I'm going to talk about supplement, not supplant. Keep in mind that if something is being provided using federal, state, or local funds, you can't supplant that with 21st century funds. So because CMP during the school year provides 2 meals and a snack free that's already funded by other federal funds, you can't purchase a snack instead of using the CMP snack. Okay, that would be considered supplanting. And so that is not allowed. All right. But during the summer is a little bit of a different situation because the rules apply to CMP differently during the summer. All right. Okay, so during summer feeding, first of all, the LEA doesn't even have to participate in a summer feeding program. Some LEAs don't. My husband works for CMP here at the state, and so he fills me in on all these things. So that's why I have some limited knowledge about CMP because I can ask him questions. But especially some of the smaller LEAs, they may not be able to afford to have a summer program because of the cost of food is so high. If they don't have enough students to feed to justify having a program, sometimes they can actually lose money if they have a summer program. So they don't have one. And again, it's not required. Okay. But if they are having a summer feeding program, it's still slightly different rules during the summer. If your LEA does offer summer feeding, the federal government will only reimburse them for 2 meals and not that extra snack. Okay. So if you have a summer program that is running 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day, the kids come in, the CMP program provides breakfast and lunch, but then they're still there at like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and you need to provide them with a snack. The CMP program can't do that. They can't fund that. Okay. They aren't reimbursed for that if they give it to you. And that's not fair to ask them to do that. So in cases like that, we will allow you to use 21st century funds to purchase snacks for your afternoon program. Okay. If that's the case. All right. So I've got regulations for this. Make sure you refer to these slides if this is something you want to do, because there's rules that you have to follow in order to get this approved. Okay. So first of all, regarding snack purchases, if you want to purchase snacks, the snack must be additional to the 2 meals or snacks that are provided by that summer feeding program. And these are just the 2 programs that are offered for summer feeding. Okay. An MOU has to be put into place between the CMP program and the 21st century program. Now that's if you're an LEA. If you are a CBO, you would have to do a contract because you are going to have an exchange of funds between your organization and the LEA, which is a different organization. Whenever there's an exchange of funds between 2 different organizations, a contract is what's required. An MOU is required if you're going to have an exchange of funds between 2 programs within the same organization. Okay. So if you're an LEA and you're going to work out an MOU with your CMP program to purchase snacks, then you would do an MOU. Okay. We do want you to try to purchase those snacks from your CMP program before going to any outside resources. The reason for this is because that way we know that the snacks are healthy and they're following the federal guidelines. We are allowing this, kind of going out on a limb to allow this. There's nowhere in the federal guidance that says that this is specifically allowable. It does say that there are food using federal funds to purchase food is new, being allowed. And it does talk about if you have a justification to do so, you can do it. And we feel like this is a good justification. Okay. We might get our hands slapped for it at some point, but right now we want to make sure that we're following as many federal guidelines as we possibly can. So we would prefer your first option is to try to purchase that snack from the CMP program that is providing the lunch and the breakfast. That's also easier for you. It should be. And it could give that CMP program an opportunity to make a little bit of money, which is kind of a benefit to them for serving you. Okay. Because again, a lot of times they're not reimbursed very much for the food that they provide. And some of these CMP programs are broke. They are actually end up in the red. Okay. So we would prefer you to purchase the snack from the CMP. In that MOU, you have to have included the number of snacks that's going to be provided per day, the number of days that those snacks are going to be provided, the price per snack, which includes a meal cost calculation. I know that sounds weird, but your CMP person will know what I'm talking about when I say a meal cost calculation. They have to do these all the time, okay? And in layman's terms, it's basically where they have taken all the costs associated with providing that snack and put it into the cost of that snack, okay? So it could include like paying for the personnel that it takes to purchase the snacks and package them. It could account for some inflation or fluctuation in market prices, things like that. They know how to create a meal cost calculation. So they should be able to provide that for you to put into the MOU. Okay. And then you have to also include the total contracted amount, the total amount that's going to be spent on those snacks for the summer program. Okay. Again, that price per snack must be reasonable and comparable to fair market prices for similar items. So they can't just like charge you $6 for a bag of chips and a milk. It does need to be, reasonable. But they can make a little bit of profit off of it because they do have to account for their staff and things like that. Okay. You cannot pay for a child nutrition worker. I just want to go ahead and throw that out there. That used to that used to be something that was allowed, but it never should have been. You can't use 21st century funds to pay for a child nutrition worker. All right, that has to be done through child nutrition. They get their money back by including it in that meal cost calculation. All right. And then that MOU has to be submitted to the ALSD and approved before you start serving those snacks. Okay. So please make sure you get pre-approval. I've already had a couple of 21st century programs who try to submit costs for food that they did not get approved in advance, and we were not able to allow it because that is the rule. You have to get it approved ahead of time. Okay. So please make sure you do that. All right. What happens though if your LEA is not having a CMP program? Well, what about you? How are you supposed to provide food for those students? Okay. So again, with permission from the ALSDE ahead of time, you may be able to use your 21st century funds to provide not just a snack, but also breakfast and lunch for your summer program. If your LEA is not having a CMP program during the summer. Okay, so here's what you have to do. Here's the requirement for that. You have to provide a letter from that LEA's superintendent stating that your LEA CMP program is not going to be running a summer feeding program during the summer. And then you have to submit a meal plan proposal that includes the cost of each meal, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or snack, a cost for each meal that has a meal cost calculation. Again, your CMP director can help you with this, even if they're not providing summer feeding. You have to tell us who the contractor is that's going to be providing that meal. Are you going to be getting the meals from a local restaurant? Or what we prefer for you to do is to try to get the meals from another CMP program. We'll talk about that in just a second. You have to tell us a plan for how that food is going to be delivered and or stored if necessary, where the meals are going to be served, etc. Okay, because keep in mind that you can't just in a school building, in a public school, the equipment that's in the kitchen is purchased with CMP funds, and it can't be used for prepping food outside of the CMP program. So if your CMP program is not running a summer feeding program, you can't use their refrigerators and their microwaves or whatever, their stoves and things like that to warm up or prep food. You're not supposed to, at least. Okay, that could be a huge finding on them from the USDA. So, and again, I only know this because my husband knows these things. Okay, so you have to have a plan of how that food is going to be delivered. It preferably needs to be warm, that kind of thing. All right. Now, this next bullet, we highly recommend that you try to contract or purchase your meals and snacks from another LEA's CMP program if possible. Just because your LEA is not running a CMP program doesn't mean that the LEA next door to you that maybe is not that far away isn't running a CMP program. Now, you may have to go pick the meals up and work that out, but you may be able to purchase your meals from them. Now, they can't provide it to you for free because your kids are not within their LEA, but you can purchase the meals from their CMP program. Again, we would have to have that meal cost calculation and all of that and, have it pre-approved, but that's what we prefer for you to do if you can. Another option to this is that sometimes local churches or community-based organizations do summer feeding programs outside of the LEA. You might be able to contract with one of them for them to provide the meals for your students, okay? And again, we prefer that because we know that if they're using federal funds to make those meals, then those meals are healthy and nutritious, and they meet all those federal requirements. Last case scenario is you could use a local restaurant or something like that if you don't have any other option. And if that's the case, then that's fine. If you can show that there are no other options, then we can tackle that and look at that together. And you just need to have a justification of why you want to use that restaurant to provide those meals for your students. Okay. But again, we highly recommend you follow the CMP nutritional guidelines as much as you can, because if we do get audited by the feds and they do question us allowing this, we want to show that we were trying to follow federal guidelines in every way that we could when we allowed this. Okay. All right. Got an hour left. All right, moving on. One other exception of when you can purchase food with 21st century funds, and that is for field trips. Okay. Some sites reached out to us after we started allowing food and said, well, what about for field trips? We had a situation where several LEAs, they did offer a CMP program during the summer, but it was only Monday through Thursday. And the sites typically on Friday would have field trips. And sometimes those field trips would be pretty far away from their site. They might be going even to another state. And they had sometimes had issues getting the CMP program to provide meals on that Friday because the program wasn't running that Friday. Now, some CMP programs would do things like make sack lunches and stuff like that, but some weren't even willing to do that, sometimes due to a concern of how that sack lunch would be stored. They didn't want to be responsible for making sure, for trusting that your 21st century program would store those snacks in a place where they would stay, stay okay for the students to eat them, that they would remain cool or whatever. And so they didn't want to do that because it was a liability, and I don't blame them, right? So what do we do in that case? So what we will allow that as well. If you are taking a field trip and you'll be traveling during normal meal times, or that field trip lasts longer than say 3 to 4 hours, and you need to provide food to those students, you can't charge the grant. Now, we do encourage you to try to use your community partners to pay for food. Okay, that's what was always occurred in the past. We're not telling you not to continue to do that. If you can get community partners to help pay for food for students on a field trip, by all means, please continue to do so. Okay, but if you can't get one to pay for it, and your only option is to pay for it yourself, you can do that. But again, there's certain hoops you have to jump through in order to get this approved. Okay. So if you want to purchase food for a field trip, you have to submit a proposal in advance to your ALSDE specialist, which details the justification for needing to purchase food. In other words, you're going to tell us your CMP program is not operating on Fridays, or there's no way for you to keep lunches cool on a bus, or whatever the reason. You need to provide a justification of why food needs to be purchased. You need to tell us your plans for where that food is going to be purchased from. In other words, are you going to stop on the way to the venue that you're going to? Is maybe there's a place along the interstate that has like 3 or 4 fast food restaurants that are right there together. That you could even potentially talk to those restaurants and maybe get meal tickets for the students, you know, and that's the cheapest way to go about doing it. Or it could be that in the long run, the cheapest and safest thing for you to do is purchase food from the venue itself. Like, for example, the McWayne Center. I know the McWayne Center has ticket options, and one of those ticket options includes the meal for the students. And so even though that meal may not be the most cost-effective thing in the world, it still may be cheaper than and more safe than you trying to find another restaurant locally walking around in downtown Birmingham with a bunch of students. You know, it may be the best thing to do is just to go ahead and purchase that ticket that includes the meal. So we're flexible. What we don't want to see happen is that you chose to go to a fancy restaurant, you know, a sit down, you know, even a buffet can be really pricey. We want to see that you did choose something that was reasonable cost. You know, of course, provide a meal for the child that includes a drink and, you know, side and all that kind of stuff, but age appropriate, you know, if they're little ones, buy Happy Meals, that sort of thing, or whatever the equivalent is, but not going to have like a sit down dinner at a nice restaurant. Okay. Not with 21st century funds. All right. And then we want you to tell us the approximate cost per student. And then, of course, the overall total cost of how much you think this is going to be. Just in your proposal, you should answer any questions that the ALSTE or the feds may have as to how that cost per student is reasonable and why it's necessary. Okay. And again, that has to be done before the trip. You can't come back and try to get reimbursement for it after the fact. Okay. Has to be approved ahead of time. All right. Any questions about food? I'm gonna take a sip of my drink real quick. All right. So please remember that your program goals and objectives and activities should drive your purchase decisions, not the other way around. You shouldn't say, "Ooh, there's these cool new virtual reality headsets. Let's buy them," and not have a plan of what you're going to use them for. You know, it should be more like, "Oh, we have a cool robotics program or STEM program, and now there's these really neat VR headsets that we could use to like really boost our robotics program or boost our STEM program or even our history program." So there should be activities that cause you to purchase certain things, not the other way around. All right. Same thing with your field trips. You should plan your field trips based on the activities that you do and not vice versa. You shouldn't say, "Hey, I want to go to the Tennessee Aquarium. What can we do as an activity that will justify us taking kids to the Tennessee Aquarium?" That shouldn't be your thought process. It should be, "Oh, we're learning about biomes and we're learning about the ocean biome, and wouldn't it be cool if we took the kids to the Tennessee Aquarium?" So that should be your thought process. Okay. All right. There is a whole list in the RFA of unauthorized activities that we recommend you check out. I didn't want to spend time just reading those to you. I do want to point this out though. Unused funds for cohort 27 and starting this year for cohort 26, by the way, we are no longer going to allow carryover of 21st century funds. Okay. I wanted to do this last year for cohort 26. I was talked out of it by Bruman. Actually, they made me put in, or they encouraged me to put into the grant that if funds were carried over, that we would reduce the next year's grant by the amount of funds that was carried over. And I agreed to that, but sometimes we don't know how much is being carried over until like December or January or February of the next year. And it's really hard to reduce somebody's funds right in the middle of their program. And it's not very fair to do that, in my opinion. And so I'd rather just go to my original decision of no carryover. I have spoken with the feds about it and made sure that they were okay with that. And they are. They actually thought it was a great idea because they want you guys to be spending the funds in the year in which the funds were allocated. And they know that there has been this really big snowball effect that has happened with carryover funds, that every year I'm scared that we're not going to get them spent out and we're going to end up sending money back to the feds. and they don't want that. So we are just not going to continue to have carryover anymore. So please spend your funds. Don't rely on the funds being carried over from one program year to the next. Okay. Any unspent funds will go to the general pot of funds. We may do supplemental grants with those funds, and then we may end up having to do another competition with those extra funds sometime soon. But we don't want to just keep letting them snowball and get bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay. Make sure you're keeping all of your supporting documentation for each of your expenditures that you're claiming and that you're getting reimbursement for. We check expenditures for CBOs very regularly, but we don't necessarily do that for LEAs, even though we have been encouraged to do that. And changes to the UGG may make us do that in the future. But please make sure that you are keeping that documentation, because we can ask for it at any time. It is also part of your compliance monitoring. So make sure that you have the receipts and the invoices to justify all of your purchases and your reimbursements. Okay, question popped up. What is the latest that budgets can be amended to ensure that funds are spent? Salaries tend to be difficult to get completely accurate way in advance. Okay, totally understand. On our part, you can submit expenditures all the way up to, typically it's November the 15th. So that year's grant ends September the 30th. You're not supposed to continue to spend funds after September 30th. So all of your funds have to be obligated or spent before September 30th. Then you can continue to submit those expenditures for an additional, I think it's 90 days, up to November 15th. And then at that point is when it will be cut off, and any unspent funds at that point will not be reimbursed and will not be carried over. Okay. So you need to make sure that your funds are spent. Now, certain LEAs have rules and regulations about when you have to spend things by. There are, in that timeline that you guys were given last week, and I emailed out this morning, there are budget checks that kind of supposed to be as a reminder to you, 50% of your funds should have been spent by now. 65% of your funds should have been spent by now. And so just try to keep an eye on it. And, do the best you can. I do understand that there may be a little bit of funds that are reverted back and not carried over. And we did think about having like a percent allowed and all that kind of stuff, but we would still be stuck in that same situation where we wouldn't know until halfway through the year. And, we need to know how much funds we have as soon as possible in the year so that we can do extra things to get that money spent if needed, like supplemental grants and things like that. So, so just try to get those done and be mindful of it as best as you can. Okay. I hope I answered your question. All right. Supplement, not supplant, does apply to the 21st century. I've already mentioned this a little bit, but just make sure that if you already had some sort of after-school programming or summer programming in place, that you are continuing and it's funded through something else besides 21st century, that you don't stop funding that activity with whatever those local or other federal or state funds are. You can't replace other local, state, or federal funds with 21st century funds. Okay. You can add to it, but you can't replace. So you can supplement, but not supplant. That's what supplant means, is basically taking the place of. So, for example, if you've always offered after school tutoring using Title I funds for a small group of kids every year, you still need to continue using those Title I funds to offer that tutoring to that same number of kids. But now you can just offer it to a much larger group of kids using your 21st century funds and offer other enrichment activities as well. So you can build on the program we use in 21st century funds, but you can't replace things. The only time you can do that is if the funds are no longer available. So, for example, when we had those COVID funds, the ESSER funds, a lot of people use those to do after school tutoring and summer programming. When those went away, you were able to use 21st century funds to take over those programs because that funding was gone. Another example would be if you're charging parents, if you've been charging parents for after school programming and now that's not allowable anymore because you're a 21st century program, the funding went away. So now you can use your 21st century funds to take the place of those. But in general, you can't, if the funds are still available, if that funding source that you've been doing after school programming is still available, you can't replace it with 21st century funds. That would not be allowable. Okay. Oh, I've talked a lot today. All right, let's talk about procurement. I'm going to try to go over this as quickly as I can. There are laws and rules about procurement. Procurement is just the regulations for purchasing items. You do have to have documented written procurement procedures, okay, in place. If you don't have, all LEAs should have those, but I know that some don't, or at least they're maybe working on theirs. CBOs may not have them. They should. I think most of our CBOs should because they've been around for a while. But if you don't have procurement procedures, written procurement procedures in place, please reach out to us and we can help you get those in place. We have some templates and things that we can provide you as resources to help you get those written. Okay, they have to include these specific topics. All right, but I'm not going to read those to you because I want to get through this kind of quickly. Methods of procurement. Okay, so thank goodness, last week at Mega, Janie from Gaston City brought to our attention that some of the thresholds have changed for the state of Alabama that I really wasn't aware of. I might should have known, but I probably was stuck in my office working on something and wasn't paying attention. But we had some updates that occurred. So it used to be in Alabama that anything under $10,000 was considered a micro purchase, but now it's $15,000. Micro purchases you don't have to get a quote for those items. So if you're purchasing something from a company, as long as the total bill is less than, or is $14,999 or less, you don't have to get quotes from multiple companies. You can just purchase the item. Okay. There are certain items that have what's called exceptions. And items that don't have Alabama exceptions. I'm going to go over some of those exceptions in just a moment. But if you're going to purchase something that does not have an exception, that number for this is still $40,000. That did not change. You will have to get quotes. So if you're spending more than $15,000 or more, up to $40,000 for an item that doesn't have an Alabama exception tied to it, then you do have to get 3 quotes for that item. Okay. And then the next number is the Simplified Acquisition Procedures Competitive Bid number. It used to be $250,000. So if it was an item that does have an Alabama exception and you were going to spend, it used to be more than $250,000, but now it's $350,000, then you have to do a competitive bid. And this is for items that an Alabama exception does apply to. So I'm going to skip ahead and talk about those exceptions so that you understand what I'm talking about. So there's 15 total Alabama exceptions, but these are the ones that you might actually encounter the most. So one is contracts for securing services of, and it lists a whole bunch of different things, including teachers, but basically any individual that possesses a high degree of professional skill where the personality of the individual plays a decisive part. So in other words, if you're hiring staff, you contracting for those services is an exception. You do not have to bid out or anything or get quotes as long as you're not planning to pay that staff more than $350,000. Okay, which none of you should be doing. Another example is purchase of instructional materials. only though if you're purchasing those materials from a current vetted and approved list that's been published by the State Department of Education. So if you're purchasing state approved curriculum materials, then those items are an exception and you don't have to get multiple quotes as long as you're not spending more than $350,000, which none of you would be doing. That's the highest amount for our grants. And then again, per computer and word processing, same rule. You don't have to bid that out because, like, for example, if you had to bid out computers, let's say that every computer in your building is a Mac. Well, we'll do the opposite. Every computer in your building is Apple based. If you had to bid it out, it may be that a Mac computer got the bid, but that's not something that is compatible with all the other computers in your building. So that's an exception. If you typically buy all Apple products, you don't have to bid that out. You can continue to buy the products that you typically buy when it comes to computer hardware without having to worry about that whole competitive bid process. Okay. All right. There's also certain circumstances when you can buy something without having to worry about any kind of competitive procurement procedures. That would be mainly single source. If you are contracting with a company that is considered a single source, in other words, they're the only ones that offer that product and they have a single source letter, then you don't have to bid out or get quotes in that case either. Just be careful about that because a lot of companies say they're single source and they have a letter that says they're single source, but really they're not. Okay. Really, there are other companies that do that same thing. Okay. So do a little Google search and make sure that you can trust that they are truly a single source because they do expect you to have some due diligence in that and not just trust what the company says. All right. You should also have procedures for your contracts. A lot of LEAs will have specific procedures in place as to when a contract is required and when only maybe a purchase order is required. Okay, we don't dictate that to you guys. If we ask for a contract to be uploaded, but your LEA says a contract is not necessary, a purchase order is all you have to do, then we just want to see the purchase order then. Okay, that's fine. If that's what your procedures say, then that's fine. But we still need to see something that shows us what you're purchasing, okay, or what services you're purchasing, even if it's just a purchase order. All right, but typically, a procedure may look something like this. You have to get a bid or a quote from the company. You fill out a purchase order or a requisition. You get an invoice or a proof that you got the item or that the service had been delivered or had been executed. You paid for that service, and then you request reimbursement from the ALSDE. Whatever your procedures are, they should be outlined in your contracts or your MOUs if there's an exchange of funds, okay? We do have contract templates that we provide to you that we're going to talk about real briefly that we highly recommend that you use, okay? Because there are federal regulations that apply to contracts and MOUs. And we found that a lot of school systems were not using those, did not have those provisions in their contracts. And so we highly recommend that you use the templates that we provide to you, or you at least compare your school system contracts to the ones that we provide to you to make sure that all of that wording that's required by the feds is included in your contracts. I'll talk more about that in just a second. One thing I want to say here, we've already talked about equipment. We talked about that in the last meeting, but I do want to point something out that my husband mentioned to me that I found that I didn't think about until he said it. But because I was verifying with him about the change in the numbers from like 10,000 to 15,000. And he pointed out to me that you need to keep in mind that you were supposed to go with the most restrictive rules. And so if your LEA procedures, if your local program procedures still say that a micro purchase is still $10,000, that's what you still have to go with. Even though the state has now increased it to 15,000, if your procedures still say that a micro purchase is $10,000, that's the number you're still going to have to go with because it's the most restrictive number. So you might want to make sure that that if you want to follow what the state requires and not make it more restricted than that you have updated those policies and procedures so that you can get that, you can use that larger number as a micro purchase. All right, just wanted to point that out. I thought it was something I didn't even think about until he mentioned it to me. Don't you know that we just have great conversations at night talking about federal programs and federal funding? That's so sad. All right, anyway, moving on. Capitalized equipment. That's another number that has changed. It used to be that if you purchased an item and that one item cost more than $5,000, it was considered capitalized equipment, and you had to report that. You had to get special permission for that. This is not just for 21st Century, any federal program. That number has now been increased to $10,000. So now, if you're purchasing one item and that one item costs more than, or costs $10,000 or more, you have to code it as a capitalized equipment, which is object code 500 through 599. And you do have to complete a request for approval to purchase capitalized equipment. This is what our documentation is that you requested approval. Title I, for example, it's incorporated into their Title I applications in eGAP. Ours is not. So we have this separate form that you have to fill out. I don't have a link to that form in this presentation because we haven't updated it to have the new amount yet, but it is on our to-do list, and we'll try to get that done as quickly as possible and re-upload it to the 21st Century website. Other things that is important for you to know about capitalized equipment: it has to be something that is not expendable and that can be used over and over for at least a year, okay? If it's a one and done thing, it's not going to be allowable. You can't spend more than $10,000 on something that has one use, okay? And this is according to the feds. It has to be something that retains its original shape and appearance with use, and under normal conditions, it could be used for its intended purpose for longer than a year. And if it gets worn down or broken, it should be something that if it's damaged, it would actually cost you less to have it fixed than to buy a new one. Okay, that is all definitions of capitalized equipment that you need to keep in mind. All right. We also have another form that we ask you to fill out that's called the request for approval for procurement transactions of $15,000 or more. So if you are purchasing something that costs, and that purchase, it could be multiple items, but that one purchase totals $15,000 or more, we do ask you to fill out this form. Again, that form does need to be updated because it was $10,000 and now it's $15,000. But basically, it follows those small purchase procedures. If you go above that, we want to basically see that you did get quotes and things like that if it's an item that there's not an exception for. And also, we just want to know if you're spending a large amount of money, like with one vendor, we want to kind of make sure that that is justifiable, that, that is on the up and up. All right. What time is it? It's 3:26. Let's see what's next. I may have to skip some things that I was going to talk about today, because I do want to talk to you about your eGAP applications, because you're going to start getting reached out to by your ALSD specialist about your application. So I want to make sure I go over that. I was hoping to be able to go through the presentation faster, but it's about the same as it was earlier. But before I go to that, really quickly, I just want to reiterate that we do have templates for both MOUs and contracts. Please understand that when you put into your budget that you're purchasing a service, we need to see the MOU or contract to make sure that the service that you're purchasing is reasonable and necessary. MOU is what you would use if there is an exchange of funds within your organization. So if you're going to contract with your CMP program and you're an LEA, then you would do an MOU. If you're going to contract, if you're an LEA and you're going to contract with your own LEA transportation department to bus your students after school or after your program, you need to have an MOU in place, okay? And it should detail how much you're paying them to provide that service, all right? And please, again, use our template if possible, or at least compare your LEA's contract to our template to make sure that you are including everything you're supposed to include. For contracts, anytime there's an exchange of funds between your organization and another organization, you have to have a contract. Again, if your LEA procedure say a purchase order is sufficient, that's fine, and we want to see the purchase order. Either way, it has to have these specific things in it, okay? I'm going to skip that and talk about this. Okay, so it has to describe the goods and services that are being provided. Y'all, in the template that we provide you, it has a list of bulleted, like recommended things that you could use. Please, if it doesn't apply, take it out unless it says it's something like if you read the instructions, there are certain bullets that are included that you should leave there because they're required. And it's either they're in italics or they're not in italics. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it tells you in the instructions which ones you have to leave there. But beyond that, if it doesn't apply to what that contractor is providing to you, take it out. I can't tell you how many times I read contracts that said that a person that was coming in and providing dance instruction was going to be responsible for the fiscal, for fiscal implementation of the site, that they were going to be in charge of finances for the 21st Century Program. I don't think the dance instructor is going to be in charge of your finances. Remove that bullet, okay? But put back in bullets saying actually what they are going to be doing, because I can't tell you how many times I get a contract and it says who the contractor is, but I have no idea what they're providing, especially when they have some random name, Empower Services. Well, what do they do? I don't know what they do. It should say in the bullets exactly what they're going to be doing for you. They're going to be providing dance instruction. They're going to be doing mentoring. What is it they're going to be providing? Put that in the bullets under the scope of services, okay? And then you have to detail how you're paying these people, okay? You have to put a timeline of the services, when their service is going to start, when they're going to stop. How often are they going to provide this service? Is it a 1 hour long thing that they're going to do? Is it 2 hour long? Is it just one person coming, or is it multiple people coming? Because when I see that a program is trying to charge $600 for 1 hour for gymnastics, that's going to be a no. But if they're bringing like 3 or 4 staff members to provide gymnastics at different age groups, then maybe $400 or $500 is justifiable. Okay, provide the details so that we know that what you're contracting with actually makes sense and it is reasonable and necessary. Okay, and you do have to include the maximum contract amount. One other thing I want to say that I didn't say this morning is if you know that that contractor is going to also provide services during the summer, make sure you go ahead and include that in the contract, because I can't tell you how many times a program has one contract uploaded to their eGAP application that just talks about what's going to be provided during the school year. Then they want to pay that same vendor to provide services during the summer, but now they've maxed out what they said their maximum contract was going to be, so they have to get another contract in place to include the summer services. So if you know you want them to provide services both during the school year and the summer, go ahead and put it in the contract and detail what services are going to be provided, when they're going to be provided, how much you're going to pay them. Okay. All right. I'm going to get off that soapbox and I'm just going to skip ahead to talk about your eGAP applications. Anything that I skip here, we will tack on to Thursday's presentations. But I do want to start talking to you about this because some of you are going to start getting feedback regarding your eGAP application for your Cohort 27 competitive application. Okay. I want to make sure you all understand that just because you got this grant doesn't mean that everything that was in your application is allowable. All right. I don't think there was a single Cohort 26 grant last year that didn't need something edited before we could approve it. All right. And the same situation is going to apply here. our ALSCE specialists have started reviewing your applications. Now that we've gotten through, the funds have been awarded, they're going through and they're looking for things that need to be removed because they're not allowable. They're looking for situations where maybe you coded something incorrectly, or maybe you are paying an unreasonable amount for something. Whatever the case may be, they're going through your applications kind of with a fine-tooth comb to provide you a list of edits that need to be made to your application before we can final approve it at the state level. Until we final approve it at the state level, you can't start drawing down funds. And technically, I don't think you're even supposed to start spending funds within that fiscal year. Okay. Now remember, the fiscal grant for this actually starts on October 1st. If you currently have a Cohort 17 grant, you're expected to use your Cohort 17 funds to get you through the end of September 30th, and then the new grant will take over. But you need to have your grant, your 27 application approved before October 1st. Okay, we had a lot of sites that kept putting it off and putting it off last year, and we did go ahead and allow them to claim some purchases, but I'm not positive that we should have done that, because when I was going through Tiffany's slides last night, I saw something that made me pause. I need to reach out and find out if I'm right or wrong. But it said in her slides that for discretionary grants like 21st Century, you're not supposed to start obligating funds until you have a final approved application. And in the past, we haven't done that. So I need to do some research and check into that. My preliminary research this morning still, I think it's okay. I think what we've been doing is all right, but still, you need to get your application approved as fast as possible just to be safe. Okay. So as soon as you get those edits from your ALSDE specialist, please don't wait to make the edits. Do it as fast as possible so that we can get them back. Hopefully, if you make all the edits they suggested, everything will be great. They'll approve it, pass it to me. I have to read through it and approve it. I might find something they didn't catch and have to send it back. Sometimes it takes some time to get that application final approved. But whenever edits are sent to you, please do not procrastinate on making those edits and getting it back to us. Another thing you need to keep in mind is those contracts. We did not require for you to have the contracts as part of your application when you applied for the grant, but now you do have to upload them. So if you said you were going to have a contracted service, you need to get that contract typed up and make sure it's got all of the required federal provisions in it. Use our template, please. Have it signed by both parties and upload it. We can't approve your application until we have that uploaded. Okay, so go ahead and start working on that now. You know we're going to ask for the contract if you have purchased services. So make sure you're getting that done. Okay. Do keep in mind, and I mentioned this last week, but I'm going to say it again. If you are a new 21st Century site, you didn't have a Cohort 17 grant, you might have had 16, but you don't have a 17 grant. Like, you don't have funds right now for 21st Century. Okay. But you need to start paying people now, because new 21st Century sites are expected to start programming by September the 8th at the latest. Now, if you have a Cohort 17 grant, you should start on the first full week of school, because you already have the grant, and that's been the requirement. Okay. But if you're new, we are going to give you some flexibility and let you start as late as September 8th, which is like the Tuesday after, I think, Labor Day. That's before the new fiscal year. So if you need to start paying people and you need to buy materials and supplies and things like that, you can apply for pre-award costs. That is allowed. What I have created, and I'm going to go ahead and skip to that. I sent it to you in an email this morning. But what you'll have to do is kind of go ahead and determine how much money you think you'll need to run your program up, like for any expenses you've already incurred starting July 1st, you can't go before July 1st, but like for you to go to Mega, things like that, all the way up to September 30th, if you need to be reimbursed for those expenses, then you need to do a pre-award cost application. And you need to tell us how much money we need to put into that application so that will cover your expenses, okay? We'll allocate that money to the application. All you have to do is budget it out. You don't even have to go into great detail with your budget. We just want a basic budget. Most of the funds are probably going to be on salaries, maybe some PD, and maybe possibly some materials and supplies. Whatever you don't spend by September 30th will roll back over into your cohort 27 application. But we need to know how much money you think you might need. Okay. Also, if you have a cohort 17 grant and you're afraid that you're going to run out of funding before September 30th because you got the new grant and maybe you want to implement some new program activities that you didn't have before and you want to make some purchases now, you can let us know that you would like some additional money, supplemental funds to be added to your cohort 17 grant. Only if you feel like you're going to spend all your other funds. Don't ask for that money if you already know you're going to have like $200,000 in carryover, okay? But if you need the money, we are more than willing to give you some supplemental funds to carry you through till September 30th. Either way, we want all cohort 27 program directors to fill out this Google form. Even if you don't want any funds. There was some people last week who said, it's not worth my time. We'll pay for the costs with some other funds, with ASAP grant or some local funds. And if that's what you choose to do, that's fine. Just understand you can't go back. You can't change your mind later, okay? It's speak now or forever hold your peace. We need you to fill out this form no later than August 6th. On August 6th, once we see what everybody has requested, we'll get with accounting and have them allocate the funds to the pre-award cost application or add additional funds to your cohort 17 grant, and then we'll go from there, okay? But even if you decide you don't want any extra funds, we still want you to fill this form out and tell us we don't want any extra funds, okay? So everybody is expected to fill this form out by August 6th. If you can do it earlier, even better, but that's the latest date. Okay, so please make sure you get that done. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that your application is going to be more than likely returned to you with edits that need to be made. And a lot of times the edits have something to do with your budget narratives or your function codes. Maybe you use the wrong function code. So I've gone in and we've created this chart that kind of details what function codes you use for different expenditures. So there's function codes and there's object codes, okay? Function codes are, I don't know how a good way to explain this, but they are, they pertain to particular types of expenses. So for example, function code 2215 is for expenses having to do with instructional staff development services. So professional development for your instructional staff is basically what that means. So any of your travel, per diem, subs, daytime subs that you need to purchase or pay for with 21st Century funds, because your instructional staff had professional development, would be coded as function code 2215. Okay, it does not include PD for admins. I've mentioned this before, I'm mentioning it again. PD for admins goes under administrative costs. All right, every year I have somebody try to sneak it in under 2215 because they're almost to their cap. You can't do that, okay? It's got to go under administrative costs. All right. 2290 is other instructional staff services. You could include your external evaluator here, or you can put your external evaluator under 9130. Either one is fine. Transportation costs go under 4188. Please note that your total transportation costs may not exceed 30% of your total grant award. Okay, so even if you got extra funding specifically for transportation, the most you got is $20,000. which should not exceed 30% of your total grant award, but you can continue to go past that up to 30% of your total grant award. If you're spending more than that on transportation, then you might need to consider not providing transportation, okay? Because we have a couple of like rural sites that they're spending a huge amount of money on transportation because they're so rural, and it just they may need to make some tough decisions for next year. All right. Again, 6,000 through 6,999 is for your administrative costs. This is going to be your salaries and benefits for your administrative staff. Also, any of those extra administrative staff you might want to hire. Professional development for your administrative staff, administrative materials and supplies. Again, your total administrative and indirect costs together cannot exceed 30% of your total grant award. Okay. Same thing with summer, 6,000 through 699 summer. That's just administrative costs that occur during the summer, but it is included in this 30%. Okay. I don't know why we code them separately. It's just what we do. I don't know if it's a requirement or not. It's just what we've always done. And so we continue to do it. But, you know, you don't have to, like, we did use different funding calculations to determine how much money you get for the school year and for the summer, but though you don't have to stick to those amounts. It really just goes into one big pot of money. And if you spend some of your academic year expenses during the summer, that's fine, and vice versa. We don't really care about that. So I don't really know why we make you code it separately. Adult learning, 9110. This is not for parent and family engagement activities. This is for if you're going to provide specific activities for adult learning for the family members of your 21st century students, okay? Like maybe during the school day or in the afternoon during programming. So you are providing specific classes or activities for adult family members of your students. That's what you use this code for, okay? Not just your like once a semester parent and family engagement activities. That is not coded as 9110. All right. This is if you're going to provide a class for like a GED class or effective parenting strategy class or family literacy strategy class for adults. That's when you use this code. 9130 is going to be extended day or dependent care. We look at it as extended day. So anything that's purchased for an extended day program. We also have 9130 summer. So obviously that would be for your summer program. And this is going to be all of your costs outside of the ones we've already mentioned. So it's going to pay for your staff, your non-administrative staff. You'll use it for field trips, medical necessities, instructional materials, consumables, equipment. Any of that that is going towards your program falls under 9130. Your external evaluator also can fall under 9130. Please keep in mind that there is a cap on what you can pay your external evaluator. It can either be $6,000 or 3% of your grant award, whichever is less, okay? So basically $6,000 is equivalent to 3% of a $200,000 grant. So if you were granted less than $200,000, you should be paying your external evaluator less than $6,000. You should be paying them whatever 3% of your grant award is, okay? All right, then you've got object codes. Object codes talk about the type of item that falls within that bigger function code, okay? So for example, all salaries, no matter what function code they go under, are coded as 010 to 199, all right? There's also specific codes that you can use if you want to, but we're fine with you just using the range. So like, for example, 161 is for bus drivers. If you want to use 161 as your code, you're welcome to do so. But if you want to just put all of your salaries together and put it under 010 through 199 salaries, we're fine with that too. We don't really care one way or the other as far as when we're that sort of thing. Benefits fall under 200 through 299. I'm not going to read all these to you. I do want to note this though. In your budget narrative for any salaries, we do want you to tell us the position name, the number of staff that you've hired in that position, their hourly rate of pay, the number of hours that will be worked, and the total salary for each position That should be included in your budget narratives. And I'm going to show you some examples of what your budget narratives should look like in just a second, okay? But these are things that if you don't have broken down, I will probably send it back for you to fix it and ask, and that'll make the process of you getting approval longer. We want to see a breakdown, okay? Purchase services, again, you don't have to provide us the contract for easy reports. We know we make you do easy reports. I know that some sites maybe forgot to put easy reports in their budget, so that might be something that your application, might be an edit that you have to that you're told by your specialist that you have to do. You may need to add easy reports. It's a $900 a year fee for easy reports per site. But if you are paying for a vendor to come in and provide purchase services or speakers to come in, we do want to see a contract for that. We don't at this time ask for contracts for things like field trips or background checks or CPR training or anything like that. But we do for your purchase services where someone's coming, like a vendor is coming in and providing a service, we do want to see those contracts or MOUs. We want to see your contracts and MOUs between your CMP program, with your CMP program or your transportation department as well. Okay, we do want to see that. Okay. I'm not going to read all these codes to you, but I do want to show you some examples of what your budget narratives really should look like. So this just kind of breaks it down, but let me show you an example. Okay, here's a good one. So for personnel, this is what we would like to see, okay? So it says that the function code is 6,000 through 6999. So I know it's an administrative positions. Object code is 010 through 199. So I know it's salaries. All right. The narrative says it's one site coordinator at $45 per hour times 15 hours per week times 36 weeks equals their salary of $24,300. Then they're also paying for one program director who is also a federal programs director. So they're going to pay 20% of that position's yearly salary with 21st Century funds at $20,000. And they have attached an MOU to back up why they're paying them $20,000. And then that $20,000, notice, is divided among the 3 sites. So for this site, the cost is $6,666.67. All right. And they're also paying one data entry position at $25 per hour times 5 hours per week for 36 weeks for a total of $4,500. And so the total line item for administrative salaries is $35,466.67. This is what it should look like, something like this. Okay, here's another example. They're gonna, now it's 9130, so I know it's extended day services, still salaries, 010 through 199. They're gonna pay one lead teacher at $40 an hour for 12.5 hours per week times 36 weeks. Typically a year is 36 weeks. So that's what we expect to see, just letting you know, okay? That would be a total. They're getting paid a total of $18,000. They're also going to pay 5 teachers at $35 per hour times 12.5 hours per week times 36 weeks. That equals $15,750 times 5 of them, which is a total of $78,750 for all 5 teachers. So the total line item in this case is $96,750. Okay. This is detailed. It tells us exactly how much you're paying your staff, who the staff are, how many there's going to be, how many hours you expect them to work each week. And it's easy for us to check. But if you just say site coordinator, 24,000, and that's it, I'm going to send it back. I'm going to deny it. I'm going to, I'm going to return it and ask you to provide a breakdown because I don't know what your expectations are. And I don't know if they're reasonable or not. So we need you to provide that breakdown. So if you did not do that in your original budget, that's something they're going to ask you to do when you do your revisions. Here's some other examples. Field trips. In your eGAP narratives, we recommend that you don't put the venue name of the field trip you're going to unless you know for sure it's on the approved field trip list. Because if you say you're going somewhere that's not going to be approved, we're going to have to send back your application just because you put a venue that's not allowable. Okay. So what we suggest you do is put something kind of general like this. Got 9130. It's a purchase service. You've got $5,000 budgeted for 2 ALSTE approved field trips, one in the fall and one in the spring. Simple as that. You don't have to tell us where you're going. When the time comes, you will submit your field trip for approval. And once we've approved it, you can spend those funds. Okay. Don't have to tell us where you're going in your budget narrative. Materials and supplies. Again, we don't want specifics unless you plan to purchase an item that's considered capital equipment. We do need to know about that. Or if you're purchasing food items, we definitely need to know about that. Again, it's also wise if you think that something may or may not be allowable, go ahead and put it in your budget narrative. And that way, you know for sure it's allowable if we approve it. Okay. It's better for you to ask for permission than for forgiveness. So here's an example of how that line item might be written. 9130, 400 through 499. That's the object code for materials and supplies. And you just put a simple description. Materials and supplies will include art supplies, paper, pens, STEAM supplies, makerspace supplies, and drama supplies for a total of $8,000. And then they added purchase of Lou interactive system for $40,000. Well, that's going to be capitalized equipment because that one system costs $40,000. If we approve it, which we would more than likely, it wouldn't be approved for Title I, but we can approve it for 21st century, then you're good to go. Okay. So your total line item, you've got the total amount is 48,000, but we know that 40,000 of that is going towards that Lou interactive system, which is fine, but we need to know about it. We need to approve it, and we need you to fill out the appropriate documentation to ask permission for that capitalized equipment. Okay. I do want to point out one thing that I just now realized. In this case of this Lou interactive system, we might actually have to send it back because it's coded under 400 through 499. And because this would actually be considered a capitalized purchase, it would need to go on its own line item using the object code 500 through 599. And so that might be something we would have to send your application back for an edit. Okay. Not to say that the Lou interactive system is not allowed. It is. It's just coded wrong because it is considered capitalized equipment because it costs more than $15,000. I'm sorry, more than $10,000 for the one item. Okay. I've got just 5 minutes left, so I just want to make sure I cover anything else. Oh, one other thing that we're going to ask you to do. Last year, we had an issue where, there's some sites may have submitted some subgrantees may have submitted an application for multiple sites and only 1 or 2 of the sites actually got the grant. So they may still have listed in their application like 3 sites that were not funded. That gets really confusing for us. And oftentimes last year, the specialists caught themselves reviewing an application that wasn't even funded. And so we asked you guys to go in and delete those. Well, the problem with that was once you deleted it, it deleted it permanently from everything. And so when you guys wanted to come back and apply for the Cohort 27 grant and you wanted to have that application to refer to, it was gone. It was deleted. So we don't want to do that again. Now that we know that would happen, we don't want to ask you guys to do that again. But what we do want to ask you guys to do is edit the name of the site. So there's like a drop down list under the sections, part. And one of the things it says, it gives you the option. It won't let us do it for you. I wish it would. It gives you the option to edit a site name. If the site did not get funded, please change the name to all caps, not funded, and then the site's name. And then we will know not to check it. We will know not to waste time reviewing an application and finding edits for things that didn't get funded. I know that seems silly, but when we're checking we literally are checking hundreds of these. And so having that there to let us know that we don't need to check that is going to help us out tremendously. So please, that's another thing they're going to ask you to do in your edits. Another thing you need to be aware of, I know I'm going to the end, another thing I want you to be aware of is your total budget amount. Because this is a continuation application, it will let you keep on budgeting forever. It doesn't make you stick to the amount that you were awarded in your grant. It will let you just keep on adding to the budget. It also will let you under budget yourself. So be mindful of your grant amount and make sure that your total budget matches the amount that you were granted by the state. Okay. So I just want to point that out because I don't know why it allows that, but it does. Until it's approved, until it has final approval, it lets you play with the numbers and move them up and down and change the amount in the budget. It doesn't make you stick to a specific amount. And so a lot of times we have to return an application because somebody either gave themselves, they budgeted too much money or not enough. And so that's a very frequent thing that happens when we're making these edits. Last thing I want to say, and then we'll accept questions. I think it's the last thing. Please do not make changes to your application details unless you've been instructed by your ALSDE specialist to do so. And this includes now and throughout this year. This is your grant application. This is your RFA. This is what you told us you were going to do in your grant, and you don't need to change that unless we've asked you to change it. Like, for example, we might ask you to tweak your program objectives to make them less about participation and more about outcomes. And so we may ask you to edit the way your objective is written in the application details. If we do that, then that is fine. But don't go in and delete something from your application details because you've decided you don't want to offer that program anymore. Okay. It tells us when edits have been made, but sometimes it doesn't specify exactly what edits were made. And so we noticed recently for cohort 26 that a couple of people have gone in and edited their application details. Thank goodness it did tell us they just edited their budget. And so that wasn't that big of a deal, but you wouldn't need to edit like your activities that you're supposed to offer and things like that, unless we've specifically said, hey, you need to remove this because this is not something that's not allowable, or unless we've said, hey, this needs to be tweaked to make it more measurable or whatever. Okay. If we do ask you to edit something, we do want you to indicate that it was edited in the narrative. So again, leave the original narrative, then put either revision or amended, and then add your new wording to be whatever we asked you to edit. Okay, that way you're not overwriting your original grant application that you got funded for, but we can easily see the edits that were made in those application details. Okay. All right, I think that is enough. Oh, one more thing about contracts. I will say this one last thing. I know it's 4:01. I'm sorry, I'm keeping you a little bit over. Every year we have people say, well, what if I'm not ready to do a contract? What if it said in my budget narrative that for the summer program, we're going to hire someone to come in and do gardening with our students? Well, that's not until, 8 months from now. I'm not ready to sign a contract with someone who's not even going to start services for 8 months. What do I do? If that is the case, that's fine, but we can't approve it in your budget without seeing the contract. So what we tell people to do, if that's the case, if you're not ready to sign a contract with a vendor yet, then you need to remove that that purchase service from your budget narratives, put those funds into materials and supplies, and just hold them there until you are ready to contract for that service. And then when you are ready to contract for that service, you'll do a budget revision. You'll move the funds back to be a purchase service and detail what service you're purchasing, and you'll upload that contract for approval, and then you'll go about your business, get approval, and then you can start that service, okay? But just understand, we can't approve an expense without seeing the contract for that expense, all right? Another thing that we can do, just to let you know, we can approve it without you doing a budget amendment if you need us to, but you just need to make sure you keep documentation of that. And the next time you do a budget amendment, you'll need to make sure you upload that email or that documentation where we told you, yes, this is fine, go ahead with this service, because we may forget. Again, there's hundreds of different sites. I know I talk to people constantly that ask me questions, and then I forget what I've told people, and it's just a lot to remember. And so keep documentation, make sure you get in writing that it's approved. We'll probably ask you to go ahead and upload that contract like in your your LEA resources so that we can see it right away. Keep documentation that we approved it, and then the next time you do a budget revision, put it into your budget and upload that documentation so that we can say, oh yeah, we did approve this back a month ago for them to go ahead and start this service. They're good to go. Okay, so that's another option that you can do. All right, I'm going to stop talking right now, but you're welcome to ask questions. I do want to share the QR code for you to sign out of today's training. I'll also put the link in the chat for you guys for those who prefer not to use the QR code. Please make sure that you are signing into and out of these trainings, because that is our documentation that we have to provide to the feds that you are participating in these virtual trainings, and that you're here for the whole time. Does anyone have any questions about anything we discussed today? I know it was a lot. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see who all is still in here. Any questions? You're welcome to unmute yourself at this point, or you can put it in the chat, whichever you prefer. Okay, when is the next training? The next training is Thursday, same time, same link. I'm not going to lead Thursday's training. Actually, Melissa is going to do it, so she's going to give me a break so you guys don't have to hear me speak. I may come in and do just a little bit that we didn't cover today, but if Melissa feels comfortable doing it, I'll let her go ahead and do that. But yes, we'll have 2 trainings on Thursday. Again, one from 9 to 12, and then a repeat from 1 to 4. And we'll go over the next topics on our list. And yes, you can get a copy of this presentation as soon as the recording is ready. I will send out a recording and I will send out the slides for you guys. And then just make sure you let any of your coworkers know that could not be here today that they will have to make this training up, or if you haven't hired your site coordinators yet, please make sure you get that done quickly. But once you get people into place, they will have to come back and watch the training video. They'll have to use these QR codes to sign in and out, but then also there will be another element where they'll have to take like a little quiz to prove that they paid attention. So that will be their documentation that they watched the training and paid attention and learned from it. So, so make sure that they understand that's something they will have to do. But as soon as I get the recording and get it transcribed and get the little test made, we'll get all that posted and send it out to everyone, along with copies of the slides.
Amanda, I know you said this earlier, but did you say for CPR we don't have to have the contract uploaded?
Yeah, you don't. No.
Okay.
Not for things like that, no. If it's something that we require that you do, you don't have to upload a contract for that. Okay. Like easy reports.
What I thought you said, just wanted to verify.
Yeah, you're good. If you want to upload it, you can, but that's not something that we require. Our biggest concern is those purchase services. Just making sure that you're hiring somebody who's qualified for the position. And then just keep in mind that if you're hiring a person, like they may be the best person for the job, but you need to provide us some information about that person. Because the first thing I do when I see, and same with the specialist, when we see like a name on a contract and they don't have like a business, we're going to try to Google that person. And if we can't find anything about them, then we're going to ask for more details. Like, what are their qualifications to do this? So, you can go ahead and like nip that in the bud in advance by going ahead and providing that information right up front. If that person, maybe they're offering tennis and they're a tennis pro, and here they are, here's their ranking. And like, I know there's like some tennis ranking thing. Here's their ranking. They're the only person in the region that's willing to do it for this price. You know, give us some background information of why that's the best person for it. Okay. And I promise it's not us being nosy. It's just because we have found several cases of fraudulent activities where people are hiring relatives to do things that they have no business doing. And they're paying people way too much money for things. And so that's why we're having to check for these. And it's LEAs and CBOs alike. So that's why we're kind of being a little bit crazy about checking all these contracts.
Amanda, I have a question as well.
Yeah.
At my school, cheerleading is a big thing for our girls and they love it. So we have a girl that's a former college leader, but she doesn't have a business.
Okay.
But she does have the credentials. So
Okay.
how would we handle that?
Okay. So first off, if it's cheerleading for like if it's for the football team, like your regular school cheerleaders, that can't really count as
No,
a
ma'am, it's
24th
for
century
our
activity.
after school girls.
Okay, for your after school girls. So that's fine. Again, if that's the best person for it, and she already works for the school, just provide us with those credentials. She was a cheerleader in college. She already works for the school system and is familiar with the schools and the students. I mean, just give us that information and that's perfectly fine.
Okay, thank you.
You can either hire her as a salaried staff member, which would be the easiest thing to do. But if you want a contract with her, that's when we're going to ask more questions. And that's when it's probably wise to just provide us with a little bit of background information.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody asked what training. Okay. Is it training? Okay. So I guess they're asking about what is the makeup training if you did not come to Mega. We are having training in the fall in October. I'm still trying to find a location where we can do it earlier, like maybe in September. I mentioned that at Mega last week, but so far we haven't found anywhere yet, but we have been given a suggestion that we're going to reach out to in the next day or two. So sometime either like right now it's scheduled for October. If we can find a date in September to do it, we're going to do it then. That's when the makeup training for Mega will be. But I am going to go ahead and record a training whenever I have a moment to do so on the compliance monitoring, which is what a bulk of what the training I did was on. So that those of you who did come to Mega and you need a refresher, you can watch that, or anybody can watch it when like right before they're about to go through compliance monitoring. It will just be kind of like a standard training that will be useful to anybody at any time. And so I will record that as soon as I have a free moment to do that. I do plan to do that, but yes, the makeup for Mega will be in the fall, either in that October date that's already in your timeline, or hopefully maybe a little earlier in September if we can find a date to do it. We will keep you guys updated on that. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I'm going to hang out here for just a few more minutes in case anyone thinks of something they want to ask. Again, our next training is this week on Thursday, same WebEx link, same times as today's training, and we will see you guys then. Hope you have a great rest of your week.